Excellent. Thank you so much, Ben. All right. So first, since it's a virtual meeting, I will read the preamble. Pursuant to the California Governor's Executive Order N2920, this meeting will be held by virtual teleconference only with no physical location. Spoken comments via a computer will be accepted through the Zoom teleconferencing meeting. To address the board, go to zoom.us/join. The meeting ID is 928-8651-2657. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, click on Raise Hand. The moderator will activate and unmute speakers in turn. When called, please limit your remarks to the time allotted. Spoken public comments using a smartphone will also be accepted through the Zoom mobile application. To offer comments using a regular phone, call area code 669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 928-8651-2657. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, hit *9 on your phone so we know that you wish to speak. All right. So we can move on to, looks like we don't have anyone dialed in, so let's move on to the agenda. Okay. So
all right, I'll begin with
to order and do the roll call. Thank you.
Chair Templeton.
Present.
Vice Chair Rupavar.
Present.
Commissioner Awcheck.
Present.
Commissioner Awcheck.
Present. Can you hear me?
I'm not sure it's just me, but your volume is very low.
Sorry, Ben. Did you do roll call? Yes. For some reason the whole thing just froze for me.
We're doing it right now.
I'm sorry.
Riggs?
Yeah, I
haven't missed it yet.
Okay,
Good.
sorry. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start with Commissioner Awcheck.
Let's try that again. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, present.
Commissioner Heckman. Commissioner Heckman. Hi, Bart, can you hear me? Wave to us if you can hear me. Can everyone else hear me?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, it looks like Commissioner Heckman's having some difficulties.
Okay,
Right, so,
should we have him log out and log back in again, you think, or try to turn his video? I know it's a sound issue.
okay, let me demote him and re-promote him. That sometimes might help.
Okay.
Okay, looks like he is actually gone.
He might be doing the reboot you suggested. That's okay. I think it's all right to wade through these technical difficulties, so we can wait a moment for him to rejoin. Do you want to do the other commissioners and then come back to him?
Sure. Commissioner Lowing.
Present.
Commissioner Riggs.
Here.
Commissioner Suma.
Present.
Thank you.
All right, let's give it one more moment for Commissioner Heckman. Do we know, Mr. Yang, if he has to answer by voice in order to be counted present?
Votes do have to occur by voice as part of the virtual teleconference rules. I don't think that there's any specific rule on roll call, but since he will have to vote by voice later on, we want to make sure that that part of his connection is working.
Yes, that's a good point. Okay, well, it looks like he's rejoined. So Commissioner Heckman?
Yes, thank you. I can hear you now.
Great.
Oh, good. So it's just logging out and logging back in was the trick, huh?
And I think Vin may have done that for me because I did.
Ah, excellent. Okay. All right.
All right, so just for formalities, I'm going to call Commissioner Heckman for roll call again. Commissioner Heckman,
Present.
thank you.
All right. Next would be oral communications. So if you are listening and planning to speak, now's your chance. We don't currently have any public attendees. So let's give it just a moment and then we'll move on. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda changes, additions, and deletions. We do have one change to the agenda. In our pre-meeting, we noticed that there's a discrepancy between how item 2 is listed in the on the agenda on page 2 versus when the report, there's a little discrepancy there. It will be a study session. I think that having it say action item in the report pages further down is a clerical error. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair Templeton.
Okay. So any other changes?
There are no other changes for the agenda.
Okay, great. Now I've scrolled to the wrong part of the agenda. Okay, so let's move on to the city report.
Great. Good evening, Chair Templeton, Vice Chair Rupavar, and Commissioners. It's good to be with you again this evening. Just some news around town to report, some of which relates to kind of the broader work of planning and development services, and to make sure that if you have any questions to the degree that I can answer them, I'm happy to answer them. City Council on Monday did pass the budget for the city. And so we're happy to report that Planning and Development Services does not have to lay off any staff or to have any bumping that would move staff maybe from our department to another department or receiving staff from another department. We know that's not the same for all city departments and for all city employees. And certainly we are suffering from having to not work as much with some of our contracts as we normally might. And so we definitely have not come out of this without challenges, without some things that we have to figure out. But we're really pleased that we were able to maintain our positions. And in fact, City Council did include keeping our senior housing planner position and our principal planner in our long range planning division. So we're really looking forward to recruiting for those positions, as well as 2 new inspector positions for building inspection to offset our diminished capacity to use consultants in that area. And we want to recognize, of course, that there are city employees who will be separating from the city very soon, which is certainly detrimental to the organization and ultimately will diminish some of the services that the citizens will receive. But we know council worked really hard and closely with departments and with OMB to figure out a budget that could do the best despite the trying circumstances that we're facing. I'm not the expert on our budget, but I will happily answer any questions that I can if you have any about the budget or kind of where we go from here. But that process did conclude on Monday, and so we'll move into the new fiscal year starting on July 1st. In addition, you may Council also heard on Monday a pre-screening for a housing project on El Camino Real, one of the planned housing zones. And so you might remember this was a few months ago, City Council revived the PC zoning, kind of with a name planned home zone, which really still is underlying as a PC in the code, and asserted that we would like to see housing proposals that have 20% below market rate housing. They could potentially have some office as long as the office or other uses was balanced with housing that provided housing for those potential new employees. And so this is a project, about 150, I think 157 units or so along El Camino Real in the research park and along with office. And council gave some feedback on that project. Council did choose to delay until August a discussion about the planned home zoning. And so we had proposed, and so staff report still available, I believe, regarding how council would like to see the BMR housing be used. That 20%, do they want to see it in particular income groups among below market rate? What are some ways that they could conceive of having housing projects come forward and still be found satisfactory to the vision that they set forward? So we look forward to bringing that forward to council in August, along with some other items. And then, of course, last night you may be aware that council did approve the President Hotel project, at least one part of the approvals that's needed for that project. So that did happen last evening as well. And then lastly, our downtown, not just our downtown, a multi-department effort led out of Planning and Development Services in close collaboration with the Public Works Department on the Summer Streets Initiative, really thinking about how in the ongoing pandemic, do we allow for restaurants and other businesses to operate, particularly restaurants outdoors, in that restaurants are only allowed in Santa Clara County to operate if they can serve folks outdoors, otherwise using curbside pickup or delivery. And so we rolled out a few weeks ago the Summer Streets closure on Cal Ave and having it for pedestrians only. We'll bring that to University Avenue as soon as this Friday, beginning at 10 a.m. And council approved a resolution and an interim urgency ordinance that really enables those programs to go forward, as well as a temporary parklet program, converting some parking to outdoor dining and retail in private parking lots, along with some other activities. So we're really excited that we're able to help our business community thrive so that Palo Alto can still remain a place where people can live, work, play, get their daily needs met. And hopefully, if you feel like you and your family want to get out, you can head to Cal Ave, University Avenue, and take in a meal safely, maintaining social distance in restaurants that are doing great at following the guidelines from the state and the county regarding how they can serve safely and people can be in public, but do so safely. So we're really, really excited about those efforts. I know I've talked for a little bit, but I do want to pass it over to Sylvia Starlack or to Nathan Baird if they have any updates from the Transportation Department that they would like to provide.
I can go real quick. In the parking, we continue to work on a lot of the planned efforts that we talked when we arrived last time, getting ready to move much of our permitting online. And, we've also been keeping a close eye on the parking situation in our commercial areas and the RPB districts surrounding Cal Ave and University Avenue during the street closures and with the parklets coming. For residents, I want you to know that we're doing counts every week to kind of just keep an eye on that, to kind of monitor the parking. But we also want to encourage you to walk and bike to these commercial areas to take advantage of them and to support them. Businesses and employees and visitors who need to drive to those areas are really encouraged to use the garages and lots, and to keep some of the on-street parking as free as possible for folks doing pick up and drop off and sort of short trips. But that's all we have from parking currently. I'll let Sylvia talk about some other efforts her teams are up to.
Thanks, Nate. Our team has been supporting the city's shift in implementation to VMT from CEQA, which we'll touch on a little bit tonight as part of the Sustainability Climate Action Plan. I'm really looking forward to this year with PTC and the council because there are a lot of juicy things happening in the land use and transportation world. SCAP being, I see SCAP as the overarching thing, and you'll learn more about that tonight. And hopefully you've seen our staff report. Following along with that, on July 8th, we are going to present the changes to CEQA, SB 743 implementation. Otherwise, we affectionately just call it VMT, vehicle miles of travel, because that's the metric we'll be using to analyze future projects. Current projects, we're using it now. And along with that, following that, we will also be looking at updating our TDM ordinance in compliance with our comprehensive plan and in compliance with SB 743. So it's going to be a lot of fun and I'm excited to get going.
Excellent. Thank you all for the updates. And it's very exciting to see the trials and ideas that you are working on going forward. So I'm excited about all of those initiatives and looking forward to next week and hearing more about vehicle miles traveled.
Great. Oh, and Chair Templeton, if anyone did have
Yeah, I've got a question. Raise hand.
Commissioner Riggs.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to shortcut anybody else. But Sylvia, I did have with regard to the TDM ordinance and some of the other things you mentioned, are those going to come for discussion items, or how will those be rolled out in terms of dialogue with the commission?
So the TDM ordinance is going to, so staff will figure out as best we can what we, how to bring something to you. We'll bring it to you and we'll bring it to council just as any kind of normal ordinance update.
Okay, yeah. So just FYI, there's some interesting experiments happening in San Jose and elsewhere that we should maybe be aware of with regard to TDM and behavioral science integration. So happy to talk offline about some of that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Riggs. Commissioner Lowing.
I just want to mention for those of you that did not see City Council meeting last night, Rachel Tanner got appropriate kudos for all the work done so far on the California Avenue project, called out by multiple council members for outstanding work. And I particularly want to emphasize the speed with which this happened and how you executed that. You executed it so fast that it was executed before council even voted on it, because they didn't vote on it until last night and you already had it done. So it's really a great example of how, staff with utilities can jump on a project and get it done with a high degree of execution success. And the restaurant owners are already claiming about how great it is. I saw an article today that the one restaurant, Tarun, had a record day. I think it was last Friday or something. And I was out there last Friday across from them, and they were packing the streets and had a great dinner and felt like we were in Barcelona. All the strolling around out there and the kids on bikes, and it was just a great atmosphere. And you got it up and going fast, which is a real help to both the citizens and the businesses there. So thumbs up for Rachel.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I appreciate that. And I do want to just shout out, Public Works is literally out there in the street, painting it, chalking it, doing all the lifting. And Sylvia Starlack and her team, Ripon Bhatia, who's our new traffic engineer, I think. There's a lot of folks who really, it's an interdisciplinary team. So any kudos I get, I do want to just spread out to them, and I really appreciate that. And thank you for visiting the Summer Street. Glad to see that it's being successful. Thank you.
I would echo that. By the way, if you haven't had a chance to watch, it was towards the end of the council meeting, but it was a great presentation and really heartwarming to see the impact of the work, the teamwork there. So thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Lowing. Vice Chair Rupavar.
I was going to commend Rachel as well. Fantastic job on the summer streets. I was out there on Cal Ave, and then I also went to summer streets in Los Gatos, Los Altos, and Mountain View to compare to other cities and see how we did. And everywhere it's just been bustling and people are out and about. So very excited. It feels very European. I'm excited to see what happens on University Avenue. When I was in Los Gatos, I don't know if you know this, but they haven't closed down the entire street due to the off-ramp on Highway 17. So they only took the parking spaces in certain areas and went out partway into the street. It's an interesting concept, but I did find it to be a bit cramped in terms of social distancing. So something to think about when you guys are, rolling out University Avenue. But great idea. I hope we bring it back next year. I've absolutely enjoyed it.
Thank you, Vice Chair Rupavar. Any other commissioners want to comment on their experiences with the summer streets? It is nice to be able to celebrate such an achievement, so thank you all. All right, please, commissioners, please take a look at the 2020 schedule that is included with item 1. And by the end of the meeting, if you have any changes to your availability, please let us know. That will be the appropriate time to bring that up, but I just want to make sure you've had a chance to look. Specifically, we only have one person identified on vacation or break, but if there are more, please let us know. Okay, so moving on then to agenda item number 2, the SCAP update.
Thank you, Chair Rupavar. I want to introduce Rebecca Atkinson, Christine Luong, and of course, Sylvia Sarlacc. They will be doing this evening's presentation. I think the SCAP is another really great example of interdepartmental cooperation and collaboration. As you all know, sustainability is something that impacts all of us and really every aspect of the city, both as an organization, but of course the city as a place to live, as a place where business occurs and a place where we make our homes. And so it's appropriate that this really is a collaboration between lots of different departments. Tonight we'll be focusing on the areas that touch closest to the Planning and Transportation Commission, namely mobility, electric vehicles, and land use. And I'm just really excited because this is, I was telling someone today, it should be a motherhood and apple pie session, in the sense that this is something that we have a lot of unanimity around as a community, that this is a value, this is a goal, and it's appropriate considering it's a global effort to try to prevent climate change, try to adapt to the changing climate, and do what we can. So while it's certainly a really urgent issue that's very serious, it's also something that, to me, this conversation is so encouraging because it's something we can do something about. And so I'm really glad that Rebecca Atkinson, who has been with us for, I think, 5 years, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca, she's been in our current planning role, but now has transitioned to long-range planning and really has been diving into sustainability on behalf of the planning portion of PDS. And then, of course, Christine Luong, who's been championing this effort from her role previously in the Office of Sustainability, and now that her role has shifted to Public Works, which is great because they put rubber on the road. They get to tinker with all of our facilities. And so it's a great place for someone who's leading our sustainability effort to be located. So we'll just have a really brilliant team, a presentation that I think you'll find very fascinating, and then a discussion that I hope will also be very robust. And just a really quick note, I'm just gonna be stretching a little bit, so I will be turning my video off. I just need to stand up because I've been sitting a lot today. So I hope that you will not mind that, but I will be here and we'll come back onto video. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Rebecca to start off our presentation.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity to share our work and the community's feedback thus far on the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update process, and have this study session with you. In this presentation, we will review the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan potential high impact goals and key actions related to greenhouse gas emissions reduction. While all 7 2020 SCAP areas are important, 3 have the highest potential for greenhouse gas reduction. Those are energy, mobility, and electric vehicles, which were recently reviewed by Council. Tonight, we are focusing on the updated goals and key actions on mobility and EVs for your review and feedback before they go to AECOM and FAIR and Peers for analysis. Those are the city's consultants for the SCAP that are helping us out with modeling. We're also going to introduce tonight the concept of a range of various levels of intervention necessary to achieve Palo Alto's SCAP goals. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to Christine Luong, our Sustainability Manager, who will present the background and current status of the SCAP process.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks for having me here tonight. I'm glad to be here. So a little quick background. Our current Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, which we sometimes refer to as the SCAP, is made up of 3 components. So the first is our 80 by 30 goal to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2030, calculated utilizing our 1990 baseline. This was adopted by Council in April 2016. The second component is the SCAP framework, which was unanimously adopted in November 2016. And then the third component is the 2018 to 2020 Sustainability Implementation Plan, which is accepted in December 2017. So it's a 3-component SCAP because we never had a fully CEQA reviewed plan. And so it has these 3 parts of the goal, the framework, and then the actual work plan, which is why so this year, 2020, one of the council priorities is sustainability in the context of climate change. The other one is improving mobility for all. Those are 2 out of the top 3 priorities for calendar year 2020. And staff is developing a 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan to help the city meet its sustainability goals, including our overarching goal of 80 by 30. And because we don't have one single document and we have this 3-component SCAP, we're working on the 2020 SCAP update so that we have just one CEQA reviewed, council adopted plan, which we don't currently have. So we have, as Rebecca mentioned, we've solicited community and council input on the first draft of the goals and key actions. And now we're presenting to the Planning and Transportation Commission tonight. So while our overarching sustainability goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2030, we have several equally important goals in the following 7 areas. These are the team leads for the 7 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan areas. And the mobility team co-lead, Sylvia Starlack and Rebecca Atkinson, are here presenting with me tonight. So the main sources of Palo Alto's greenhouse gas emissions are very simple. About 2/3 come from gasoline and diesel vehicles, and about 1/3 comes from natural gas consumption in buildings. So this is a very familiar chart that we show all the time. It shows our 2018 overall greenhouse gas emissions from both Palo Alto municipal operations and community-wide emissions in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, starting with our 1990 baseline, and then 2005 as a point of reference. So as you can see, by the end of 2018, Palo Alto reduced our greenhouse gas emissions about 36% from our 1990 baseline, despite a population increase of 20% during that same time period. So the red bar, which dominates the chart, is road transportation, and that represents Palo Alto's largest remaining sources of greenhouse gas emissions at about 64% of the remaining total, followed by natural gas use, which is represented by the solid blue bar at about 32% of remaining emissions. Now the shaded blue bar represents our Palo Alto green gas offsets. So we purchase natural gas offsets as a bridging strategy. The offsets are purchased in an amount equal to the greenhouse gas emissions caused by natural gas consumption within the city. But as you can see from this chart, our natural gas consumption really hasn't changed at all in the past few years. And for most cities in California in general, transportation emissions comprise the largest remaining source of greenhouse gas emissions. So we're not alone in this issue. It's something that a lot of cities and jurisdictions are struggling with. And so we need about 300,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents of additional reductions to meet our 80 by 30 goal. So we solicited feedback from the community on the first draft of the goals and key actions. We had a virtual on-demand SCAP community engagement workshop that had 204 participants. We have opportunities to provide feedback on our sustainability website. And then we had 21 people who submitted comments at the April 13th council study session. So for that first draft of the goals and key actions, several themes surfaced in the input we received on them. Mainly that the people who commented were generally supportive of the 2020 SCAP and don't want to delay any action on climate change despite all the uncertainties going on right now because of the coronavirus pandemic. The majority of the commenters noted that the pandemic has shown that it is possible to work from home and to work from home effectively. They suggested we explore remote work strategies to reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions. And the commenters also noted that housing and land use were areas of focus that were missing and sorely needed, and that educating the broader community was also something that was lacking. So we took all that community feedback and updated the goals and key actions and presented that to Council on June 16th, where one of the recurring themes was that the city may need to employ some higher intervention strategies to achieve our 80 by 30 goals. Voluntary action isn't going to get us there. So we took all of the community inputs to update the goals and key actions, and the goals and key actions are going to become the foundation of the 2020 SCAP. So the high impact goals and key actions for greenhouse gas reduction that we're reviewing tonight are just a subset of the full list of all of the potential goals and key actions in all 7 areas. So the high impact goals and key actions are intended to ensure that enough emissions and cost data are prepared to ultimately formulate multiple scenarios to meet the 80 by 30 goal. So we can give council choices among different packages of scenarios. So for in a departure from our previous iterations of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, this year we recognize the intersection and the interdependence of the mobility and electric vehicles areas. So they share the same main goal and have different sub-goals. So the main goal that they both share is to reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions 80% from approximately 300,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent to 60,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030. And as you can see, for the electric vehicles, it's the same main goal, but with different sub-goals. And the key actions that we've come up with so far that are needed to get us to 80 by 30, we came up with more than what we need, so that council will have some choices in what key actions are ultimately selected. And we are including key actions that could potentially be difficult or expensive or rather inconvenient to achieve. Some of the key actions we're going to discuss tonight will require additional legal analysis in coordination with other agencies before presented to council for final selection. Others might require voter approval and could ultimately be included in a potential ballot measure. So while we won't know the exact greenhouse gas reduction potential or costs or sustainability co-benefits of the key actions until after our consultants, AECOM and Fair and Peers, complete their impact analysis, we do know that there are 4 areas that have the highest potential to reduce greenhouse gases. So these are to electrify most residential buildings. After AECOM does their impact analysis, we'll present council a range of options that could potentially add up to what we're estimating is between 15 to 20% of the remaining reduction needed from electrifying most residential buildings. The next is to significantly reduce fossil fuel use in large commercial buildings. And that could potentially add up to 5% of the remaining reduction needed. To significantly reduce vehicle miles traveled. This will require a lot more modeling from AECOM and Fair and Peers to get a better sense of how much we could realistically reduce VMTs with a range of scenarios. And then finally, electrifying the vast majority of remaining vehicle trips. So we can implement key actions to reduce vehicle miles traveled related to commuting, but we can't prevent people from driving in order to run errands or socialize or drive their children to school or drive to things unrelated to work. The only thing we can do with those trips is to encourage electrification of those remaining vehicle trips. So next we have to look at the range of key actions that we could select. So from our current voluntary market-driven solutions on the left, to the middle column, which is things like ordinances and the REACH code, to the higher intervention column on the right, which we haven't done any yet. So those would be things like voter approved mandates and potentially voter approved fees or taxes or bonds, where the heavy lifting is involved. Our consultant AECOM will estimate the greenhouse gas reduction potential, costs, and sustainability co-benefits, such as improved local air quality or reduced cost of living of the potential key actions. This impact analysis will provide a range of costs per greenhouse gas reductions that will have various options along the spectrum of tools for achieving climate goals. So staff envisions using the impact analysis to come up with a set of potential key actions that will allow multiple options to get us to our 80 by 30 goal, as well as trigger points for when more interventions are needed to achieve those targets. So for the next 2 years, we may need to focus on the most low cost and lower certainty key actions, and not necessarily the highest greenhouse gas reduction potential actions. But at the same time, we're going to have to explore different funding streams, such as ballot measures, bond measures, or establishing a carbon fund or VMT bank, so that when the pandemic is over and when there's more certainty with the economy and everything, we're ready to go with some of these higher intervention key actions. So for the electric vehicle area, we proposed a total of a range of 15 key actions. And the ones we're highlighting tonight are the key actions with the highest potential for reducing greenhouse gases from transportation or vehicles. I'd like to point out number 5, to ban the registration of gasoline vehicles in Palo Alto by 2030. This could achieve about 50% of the remaining greenhouse gas emissions reductions needed. But obviously, this one would need to go under legal review to see if the city even has authority to do something like this, and would most likely need voter approval. So now I'd like to introduce Sylvia Starlack, our Transportation Planning Manager, who will review the key actions for mobility.
Thanks, Christine. For the mobility area, we proposed a range of 14 key actions. These are the 6 key actions with the highest potential for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation or vehicles. We can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector by either electrifying all transportation or reducing the amount of emissions from road vehicles by switching to less polluting forms of transportation. Because it generally takes 15 to 20 years for a vehicle fleet to turn over without mandates or intervention from the market. Conversion to electric vehicles in Palo Alto would need to be accompanied by shifting to cleaner modes if we want to hit the 80 by 30 targets, because that 30 is 2030, it's 10 years away. Can we could do this by implementing key actions on the slide, including number 5, improving our transportation demand management strategies, including encouraging telecommuting, as well as number 6, using land use to reduce vehicle miles travel by thoughtfully locating people close to goods and services so they can more easily walk, bike, or take transit to meet their needs. According to the California Pollution Control Officers Association, which has assessed greenhouse gas reduction strategies, location efficiency has the largest impact on greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. In addition, recent guidance regarding sustainability climate action plans, as well as changes by the state to the California Environmental Quality Act, have created a regulatory ecosystem that allows cities to more easily approach future land use decisions with an eye toward reducing transportation emissions by not increasing vehicle miles of travel, also known as VMT. Due to California Senate bills, sorry, just lost my page, Senate bills that were adopted in 2013 and 2018, it's SB 743 and SB 375. The focus of CEQA transportation analyses shifted to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, creating multimodal transportation networks, and promoting a mix of land uses that reduces the need to drive. Transportation and planning staff will return to PTC on July 8th to discuss the changes and how the city will implement CEQA as required by state law. But I wanted to mention that all the items on this slide are encouraged by the new CEQA update. The next slide is Yes, thank you, Christine. This slide presents an expanded view of item 6 on the prior slide. We took to heart the public comment that was received about land use and added land use strategies to be modeled. We can refer them in the discussion later on, but briefly, these all relate to creating green streets for active transportation, as well as enacting policies and programs that support transit provision and the development of more walkable neighborhoods. So before I wrap up and ask for feedback, I wanted to let you know about our next steps. So first, AECOM is creating a citywide greenhouse gas emission inventory, including providing a more accurate methodology for calculating our transportation-related emissions, which will include airport emissions for the first time in accordance with new reporting protocols. AECOM will also calculate a business as usual forecast to show what emissions reduction would be achieved if we don't add any new policies or actions. We're looking for your feedback tonight, but next week, the Parks and Recreation Commission will hear this item and provide feedback. And then this fall, the impact analysis on the draft key actions will estimate the greenhouse gas reduction of the potential actions, their estimated costs, and the additional sustainability co-benefits, such as improved air quality, preservation of habitat, reduced cost of living, or reduced socioeconomic disparities. We've solicited feedback from the community on the co-benefits through the virtual public forum. The results of the AECOM and Fear and Peers impact analysis will help us further refine the goals and key actions needed to get us to our 80 by 30 emissions reduction target. The recently updated VTA travel demand model will be used to generate greenhouse gas emissions estimates from the transportation sector. We hope to present a package of options to council in the fall. So before your discussion, we wanted to highlight our key points. Road transportation is the largest remaining source of greenhouse gases. We have 10 years to reach our goal. We are asking you to consider the spectrum of tools framework and the level of interventions we may need to reach our goal. The next phase of the project is for these strategies to be modeled to see what key actions will be most effective. And while we don't know exactly what the modeling will tell us, we do know that the interaction between land use and transportation is key, and that land use has a high impact on greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, CEQA now requires that developments generate less driving. And in fact, these changes to CEQA now promote things like locating housing closer to jobs. While there's no motion tonight, we recognize that PTC has valuable knowledge and expertise and can recommend strategies that might be successful in this community as we strive to meet the challenge before us. So these are our suggested questions for discussion at this study session. We are available for your questions. Thank you for your time.
Wow, thank you all for a very thorough and detailed presentation. I watched it last week on City Council and I thought it was fascinating, and I can see already you've incorporated some of the feedback. Now would be the time that we would go to public comment. So if you're planning to make public comment, please dial in now. I will say that you received a significant amount of public comment during the City Council meeting. Is that right?
That's correct. We had about 20 people speak, and then we had about 10 people send in comments.
Excellent, excellent. Well, all right, looks like we're not going to receive public comment tonight. So commissioners, it is all yours. Please raise your hands and we will go in order of whoever raised of hand raising order. So let's start with Commissioner Riggs. Thank you. Commissioner Riggs, we can't hear you. There you go.
I'm double muted, sorry. Yeah, apologies. Get it, turn on. Okay, there we go. This is a good presentation. Thank you, Sylvia and Christine. I appreciate it. I have 3 or 4 points of feedback, some of which is kind of dribbled out over the last couple meetings, so it's actually pretty relevant. First off, I'm really concerned about all the telework bias in this report, because telework is not carbonless. Actually, some of the most recent data on telework actually shows an increase in trips, even though they're shorter trips. An increase in trips, it could mean more cold starts. So I would say it's not a zero-sum game, and to be weighing emissions reduction and to be hanging a significant emissions reduction on telework behavior is really a shifty show. And we've known this for years in transportation theory, that actually even pre-COVID, when people teleworked, they still made trips. They made recreational trips. They made trips to the coffee shop. They made trips to go shopping, et cetera. And by and large, I have some data I'm happy to share with you in a new survey that we did. By and large, we're finding those trips are primarily done via driving. So I think I would not be including that as a strategy. I'll just be blunt. I think that's faulty strategy. So I think that relates to 2 or 3 of the initiatives, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to be candid and put it out there. I think that's a recipe for not achieving our emissions goals. I guess the second piece of feedback is I think big supporter of green streets, slow streets. As I said, it's been if people know my work, that's definitely been in my wheelhouse as a researcher. However, in a place like Palo Alto, we can start to treat green streets, safe streets as pastoral. And so the issue there, it doesn't recognize what we have as a regional commute shed. So it doesn't recognize that many people who live in Palo Alto don't work in Palo Alto. And so to recognize a green streets, a walkable streets, bikeable streets strategy as a commute reduction, greenhouse gas reduction strategy from a transportation standpoint has some flaws. So I'll just leave it at that. And we also need to recognize that bikes and walking and cycling is not a last mile strategy for everyone. And nestled up to that, I don't see anywhere in here. So I have a little inside baseball knowledge in some of this, but there's a lot of emerging microtransit, last mile transit pilot strategies throughout the Bay Area, a lot of shared mobility pilot strategies, mobility as a service pilot strategies in the Bay Area. I don't see that anywhere in here. To me, that is a more realistic recognition of the actual commute shed, as opposed to, I think what green streets, walkable streets really are focused on are recreational trips. So I think we just that we have to keep that in mind, that many people who work in Palo Alto don't exactly live in Palo Alto, and many people who live in Palo Alto don't exactly may or may not work in Palo Alto. The last, I think and I'll just the parallel to that, the banning ICEs, I see that as being a huge social equity. Not only is it, I'm pretty sure it's not legal. I'm pretty sure that is not within our jurisdiction. I'm not an attorney, but I'm pretty sure that is controlled by California DMV. But I think that's again, it doesn't recognize the commute shed issue, and so it's bundled into this this concept that if you're going to ban that type of internal combustion engine, then what type of alternative modal services are you providing beyond a bikeable, walkable distance? So, beyond your 5-mile catchment radius. Last comment, and this is a emerging red herring, particularly for employers in Palo Alto. I didn't see, and maybe I missed I think there's a nuance here. There was a pricing, Sylvia, there was a pricing point on your slide, parking, just your parking pricing. I think an emerging issue here that really needs to be pinpointed in the sustainability plan is employer parking. We should be banning free employer parking. We should be, I mean, I don't actually think that employers should be providing parking at all. And I think this is where, you know, we spent a lot of time talking about residential parking programs and car storage, but I think the emerging trend we're seeing in the Bay Area is, yeah, we have car-free, car-light housing developments, but a lot of people are beginning, particularly when we have employers that are allowed to build large parking lots and aren't pricing their parking, those just become car storage facilities as well. And you know, maybe we're okay with that, but that induces driving just like having car storage at a housing unit. So I really think we have to think about the employer side of the parking situation and whether or not that's an outright ban on employer provided parking or a pricing scenario for them. I actually think that's probably a lever that is an immediate lever that we can pull. So those are my comments. I don't really need a response. I just providing some thoughts there.
Thank you.
Chair Templeton, would it be okay if transportation staff did want to provide some responses?
Of course, yes, please do.
I think it's some great points that Commissioner Riggs is bringing up. Sylvia, did you want to?
Yeah, Sylvia, no, I hope you all see this as in no way a challenge to the great work you're doing. So like so the public is aware, like I have a really awesome, and I feel like a great partnership with the transportation staff. And so everything I'm bringing up now is really just more of an education as opposed to pointing out flaws. We have to see ourselves as a team. So Sylvia, apologies.
I think none of your comments are taken with any offense, Commissioner Riggs. I think that part of what's great about the PTC is the ability to have this really good dialogue, not just like a back and forth, like there's actually communication that's robust in the discussion format. So I think it's really great for our staff to be able to dialogue with yourself and with other commissioners. Sylvia?
Yeah, thank you. To a certain degree, we did anticipate your comments, Commissioner Riggs. Christine, can you show the CAPCOA chart of TDM greenhouse gas reductions? I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the California Pollution Control Officers Association, I mentioned, they did an analysis of which, I know you can't read it, you could look it up, and or maybe you can read it if you have the presentation. Yeah, it's a little tiny.
I've seen the chart before.
Yeah, so I mean it's old. It's 10 years old. It has been updated by Farron Pierce, who's actually our consultant on the SCAP. So that's great news. And yeah, and they indicated 10 years ago. Actually, yeah, they indicated 10 years ago that telework would maybe get you 5.5% reduction of work VMT. I mean, that was pre-COVID, so maybe with a little more uptake, it will be better. But your point is well taken, and
I mean, my dissertation chair, I remember the lecture. Anybody that went to UC Berkeley and got a planning degree, took Bob Cervero's class, they know that he did not believe in telework, and he believed it induced extra trips. And in the 80s, they actually found some data that said it actually did increase trip generation. So I'm very distrustful of these reduction figures. And we did see. The funny part is we did see. I will share a nice graph with you after this meeting that shows this huge uptick in trips. And you know what it is? In March, it was from 4 to 6 p.m. when everybody drove to the grocery store. And so it's really, I'm happy to share that with you. I mean, so that I think I'm just saying like caution is of the essence with regard to.
Yeah, no, for sure. And this chart is interesting for the other strategies that are on there that are more impactful. And also what I appreciate about it is that the land use context in which many of these strategies occur really affects how efficacious they are. So, it even says across the top, if you're in an urban situation, you're going to get this much reduction. If you're in a suburban situation, you're going to get a lot less reduction. So So yeah, this is really hard. This is the hard stuff. This is the hard work. This is why the bars on our chart the red bar is so big on the SCAP chart, because there are so many different, in a way, transportation markets. You know, it's all the different trips and, you know, trip purposes, all the things. Anyway, so I just want to say that I also want to mention, you know, the shared mobility stuff is not in this presentation. It is in the documentation. I think that was linked in there. So we do have a list of many more items, not just these items in this presentation, that do include shared mobility. So I just want to make sure I responded to that. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that the shared mobility piece that I've been really cautious that I don't pigeonhole the technology, because I just think that in my comment, I'm just really talking about last mile, you know, basically your catchment of transit, or your access to transit beyond what is a bikeable distance. And I think that's, but that also, when we have these projects that come in, and for example, one that came in on San Antonio, and it's not a high capacity corridor, but in the future, there's nothing to say that it couldn't be a high capacity corridor. And there's nothing to say that we couldn't have a rubber tire transit solution that actually connected to regional rail at San Antonio. And so I do think that, like, this is not just a transit dialogue, it's also a housing dialogue in terms of how we open up new housing opportunities by rethinking transit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a follow-up question, and I'm not sure if Commissioner Riggs or if the transportation staff wants to handle it first. But when you talk about the short trips, and I was thinking back to the land use thoughts you had about how we want to have our land use structured so that those short trips are walkable or reachable without vehicles. Can you tell me more about that, or is that going to be the kind of thing we talk about at our next meeting? So I'm thinking, if people are if they work from home and they're going out for coffee, is there a coffee place in a walkable distance from them, or something like that?
Maybe you could go to, I think that, not to jump in, but I think that was part of the land use list they had.
Right.
What some of those co-location ideas. Do you want to speak to that, Sylvia?
I mean, this is just a, in some ways, it's kind of like a basic planning thing. You know, if you want people to walk, you have to put stuff near them that they can walk to. And CEQA is basically going to require a lot more kind of mixed use in order for certain kinds of developments to get through CEQA without creating an impact. And we'll learn more about that in July when we come back, but one of the first mitigations that a project can do in order to meet that threshold is to change its land use mix so that some trips are internal. You know, on a larger scale, if you are looking at a neighborhood, you know, how do you get some trips to be internal? You know, you put a cafe down, or a small store, or other services that are local serving. So
I appreciate that. I think for the benefit of the public who isn't steeped in it every day, like yourself or Commissioner Riggs, it's really helpful to start talking that out as we look ahead, right, to the kinds of discussions we're going to need to be having, and how that'll change a little bit. Commissioner Riggs, did you have a comment?
No, Sylvia nailed it.
Okay, excellent. All right, other commissioners who would like to speak, please raise your hand. And thank you for the great commentary, Commissioner Riggs. All right, Vice Chair Rupavar, please.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with everything that Commissioner Riggs said. And I had a question for you. I also agree that, you know, mandating electric vehicles presents a social equity issue. But I was wondering, have you guys factored in, we have a trend towards electric vehicles. We're generally seeing it. Have you factored in, or do you have data on how much that's going to naturally occur as people continue to buy Teslas or other types of EVs? And how much that's going to reduce our GHGs naturally?
Yes, I don't remember the exact numbers, but our electric vehicle team does have all those projections. And they are projecting that without, just based on our current trends and without too many additional interventions, we'll probably be at around 50% EV penetration by 2030, which seems to me like a lot, because considering right now we're at 7% penetration. However, Palo Alto has the highest EV penetration, I think, in the country. And in 2017, a third of all new vehicle sales were electric vehicles. So based on the trends and everything, they're predicting 50%. So they think that with additional interventions, it's not completely out of reach to get to 80% by 2030.
And do you have a sense of, how many people that live in Palo Alto actually work in Palo Alto? Going back to the Commissioner Riggs race.
I don't have a sense of the people who live in Palo Alto, how many work in Palo Alto, but I do know that the outbound commuting in is, our population doubles from people commuting into Palo Alto to work during the day.
Thank you.
I can look that up really quickly on the census website if people are interested.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Rubavar, and Commissioner Riggs. Feel free to pass that information along if you wish. All right, any other comments ready to go? Please raise your hand. Oh, Vice Chair Rubavar.
I had one more question. I don't want to take up too much airtime, but since nobody else raised their hand, with respect to the density issue, are you guys, are we doing anything similar to the Senate bill that was proposed and failed by, I think, Senator Wiener on, we don't want to increase density, I guess, because that's going to add more people and more trips, but like shifting greater density, can you tell me a little bit more about what your thought process is behind that, what we're doing or what we can do?
So yeah, I'm glad that you asked that question. There's a little bit of a fallacy that if we add more people here, that we'll have more VMT and we won't be able to reach our goals. The reason CEQA was changed was partly to encourage greater density, to put more things closer together, because having things further spread out is how you get more driving and more greenhouse gases. One of the things that I will encourage the commissioners to do when the staff report for the VMT item is available to you is to please watch the videos that are linked in that staff report that come from the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, that explain the move to vehicle miles of travel and why CEQA was changed to use this metric. Those videos are very accessible and explain kind of how what is measured or what is analyzed affected and can affect the built environment. And so now that the metric is about measuring how much driving a particular development is causing, that will likely have effects on what kinds of development is proposed and where.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, just to finish up with the density. Density tends to work in favor of, the density would be generally supported by the CEQA analysis.
So, and just to circle back to the question, based on what's called LEHD data, we know kind of in terms of inflow outflow jobs that there's a lot of inflow, but it looks like there's about 21,000 primary job outflow. So we can basically say that represents a potential trip. We can't call it a trip because it's not, we don't know that it's a trip, but we know that it's a job that resides for someone that lives in Palo Alto that would work outside Palo Alto.
I think Commissioner Riggs, you also have in that chat data, which folks can hopefully see, that there are about 7,000, roughly 7.2% of folks who are employed and living in the selection area. So they live in Palo Alto and work in Palo Alto. Is that correct? About 7.2% of that.
Yeah. So this is all public data from the Census Bureau, and it's basically the census employment data. So it's not trip data, but basically this is how you can think about population inflow, outflow.
Great, thank you for that. That's really helpful.
All right. Any other questions, Vice Chair Rupavar? No. Okay.
No.
Commissioner Suma.
Hi. Thank you to staff for pursuing this in such an organized way. It's an informative, and I watched the council session on this from last week. So a couple of things. I'm open to any sort of data that people have, but the teleworking thing, I think we have all experienced we have incredibly good air quality in the Bay Area. And my observation is it's very hard to tell now because of COVID, but I think that because we're only have been until recently, most of us only making necessary trips out of the house. So it's hard to know right now. It's very hard to know when these impacts will or can be over. It could be a very long time still. So I still think telecommuting is a great option for people in certain industries. And what's remarkable, the people it's worked best for are people in the tech field. Like my husband who works at Amazon, he's been working at least as much as he used to. And so I am skeptical of there not being a lot of potential in that. And I am also interested in discussing land use from the point of view of not building more office that is not commercial that is not neighborhood serving. And I think what you'll find also is that there are certain traditional types of retail that, yes, are going away a little bit, but social retail, cafes, restaurants, those things are all increasing and very vital, except for the pandemic circumstances. So I would like to see a movement away from building more of the type of commercial that attracts and takes over the places of what are supposed to be local serving commercial so that people can walk to things they need. And we've seen a lot of loss of that in the California Avenue area with Class B and C office, where accountants and rolfers and people that provided those types of services have lost to redevelopment or just tech companies moving in. So we do have things to prevent that in our code, but we haven't been very successful in doing that. So I would like to see that sort of reduction. I also think I'm very struck by the social equity comment that Commissioner Riggs made, because a lot of our lower income workers in the Bay Area are people that are not at this point likely to be able to afford an electric vehicle. A lot of our undocumented workers actually buy used vehicles with registration. So we have to be very careful that we're not creating an elite island out of Palo Alto. And I also am very curious if staff has any consideration of the effects if everybody went to all this electrification, the effects on the electric grid and how much green electricity is available to buy. I understand all of ours isn't green because we buy some offsets, and it's just that there's not enough created. And then, we have climate change and rolling brownouts for people for prophylactically addressing fire. And, electricity becomes more tenuous in future scenarios of climate change and temperature rise and those sort of issues. So I worry a little bit about how that's going to play out, not just for Palo Alto, but across the whole region and for everybody. And I think all of the ideas are worth pursuing. I think some to me are kind of feel good efforts. And I appreciate that people want, the council wants that kind of stuff like TDM and those kinds of things. I don't personally feel have been very successful. We don't have any very good documentation on how those have worked. So I think there's a lot of potential in really eliminating, creating more office of the type that attracts even more workers with the biggest jobs housing imbalance in the country almost. I just don't think those are the kind of jobs we need to bring more of to the Bay Area. I think we, especially Palo Alto, I think we need to spread them out with places that need those jobs and retain an environment that is also conducive to keeping our lower paid workers. So I would worry that some of these things are sort of feel good things that aren't going to do as much. And I really have a great hope in teleworking being retained in the future. And I know for us, we haven't been making more trips, but that could be COVID. I mean, we've been making hardly any trips. Like I haven't been going shopping or very much. So I think those are the big important takeaways for me. As with regards to VMT, I've read a lot about VMT, and I know that the council had, I know we have to do it for CEQA, but the council also wanted to keep LOS as a local standard. So I've read a lot about VMT that says it's sort of experimental and that we don't have a good understanding of what the impacts are. So if that could be explained, I think that might be helpful. And let's see, I have some other notes. Yeah, and I envision for new buildings and it's easier to have all electric than retrofit for older buildings. And, people put a big investment in cars and wiring and gas and appliances. And then that is not something I think we can. And that seems really hard for me to imagine asking everybody to eliminate all their natural gas use by in 10 years. I just bought a new stove last year and I envision never buying another one in my lifetime because I bought something that I thought would last forever because the ephemeral nature of appliances is irritating to me. They're made to break and not last very long. And then there's certain technologies that are being pushed that aren't very practical. I had heard about heat pump, hot water heaters a long time ago because it was a big issue that came up on the comp plan group. And I looked into it one night because our hot water heater broke, and I literally could not use one in the house I live in. They are you have to have big rooms. They have to be in basements or garages because they're so noisy. My furnace room is literally not tall enough to accommodate it. So there are some new technologies that are really good, but they're not available in all locations. And heat pumps, I really looked hard at that because I had been aware of it. I also looked at the continuous hot water heater, which is not really the little tiny ones. Those aren't really considered to be an environmental advantage, however. And you have to put all new gas lines out to the city hookup. So I would just caution against things that haven't proven to be very realistic in the past. And to also remember that people in Silicon Valley tend to move quite a bit. So locating people permanently close to their jobs is kind of hard to do. We do have a lot of retired people, so that's not as much of an issue in some cases. So those are kinds of things that I am looking at. And I really, really, really worry about the social equity issue and also worry about the kind of commercial that we are allowing for. Rachel Tanner mentioned the project at the new PHZ Planned Housing Zone community project at 3300 El Camino. It's important to remember that's also got 54,500 square feet of, office, not the kind that will be available associated with it. And it's kind of disappointing to me to see, it is 187 units, I believe, residential, but it's kind of disappointing to see that zone being used for something that's has such a significant non-residential component. And I'd like to see more of a commitment to using that resurrected planned community zone in its new capacity as really all residential, and then the kind of commercial, as Sylvia mentioned, on mixed use on site that would support the people living in the building. So those are my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Suma. Did staff want to respond to any of those comments?
Yeah, I think one thing I want to lift up, and I want to thank Commissioner Suma for, is just kind of one of the follow-up questions that the staff have posed, is kind of what are key actions that should be prioritized when we are working with your and peers in ACOM to model. I heard really strongly that maybe we should look closely at the teleworking, and I thank Commissioner Riggs and Suma for kind of trying to think about some of the nuances of teleworking, like what kind of trips are people making? Obviously COVID type trips, I think to Mr. Suma's point, we may all be just making less trips in general. So right now is not probably a good way to test the impacts of teleworking because it's a very unusual time, but perhaps maybe updated a little bit. And then if, to your point, if we do have some more co-location where people can be close to the things they need to do on those trips, they could walk to them, they could take shorter vehicle trips, even taking a trip. And so maybe that's something we should raise up and kind of look at more closely. In particular, what would happen in Palo Alto if our jobs housing imbalance changed a bit? How might that impact our GHG emissions, right? And what kind of needs would need to be there? I wondered if Christine might speak to your question, which I think is a really good one, around how the source of our energy, right? Just because it's electric doesn't mean it's clean or GHG free. And so I know that the state of California has some goals surrounding how our energy portfolio shifts over the next, I don't know if it's decade or a couple of decades. Christine, do you want to speak to that?
I can speak to that. So Palo Alto is ahead of the game in terms of where the California state goals are. So the California state goals, California has a renewable portfolio standard that was just updated 2 years ago, which requires that all electricity come from renewable sources. 60% of all electricity come from renewable sources by 2030, and that all of the state's electricity come from carbon-free sources by 2045. So in Palo Alto, we went carbon neutral electric in 2013. So all of our electricity in Palo Alto is currently carbon neutral. The offsets that we produce are just for the natural gas side of things, which isn't for electricity. And in terms of your question about the effects on our grid, so our utilities staff have done the number crunching, and we can handle, if every single car in Palo Alto was electric and every single building and home was electrified, we do have the capacity. We would have to, some homes would need to upgrade their transformers, or those types of things. We'd have to upgrade some of the infrastructure, but the overall grid capacity would be fine. That doesn't address your issues about the brownouts or blackouts or things like that. One of the things that our utilities department is doing to try to mitigate that is by undergrounding all the power lines. That prevents a lot of the weather related issues. Like we wouldn't get some of the issues that happened like at the campfire, for example, because everything is getting undergrounded. So.
Well, my understanding from our last meeting is that undergrounding is so much more expensive that most things will not be undergrounded, even out in the hills. And so it would be great if it was all underground. And my understanding is it's not happening right now. And I wasn't thinking just about Palo. I mean, it's good to hear that our grid and we're kind of unique because we have our own utilities, but like I said, I don't want Palo Alto to be an island, and it's hard for me to imagine in the future that this isn't going to become more of a problem for most people in in California, especially with the state of the utilities. So just a concern there about what's going to happen for other people too.
And I will point out that one of the sort of more philosophical debates that we've been having is, so we do currently purchase natural gas offsets that went into effect in 2016. And one of the more philosophical debates we've had is that was always meant to be a bridging strategy to get us to our 80 by 30 goal. If you do count natural gas offsets, our overall emissions are down about 56%. Philosophically, some people don't think that that should be counted. And because we only have 10 years to meet our 80 by 30 goal, that is one of the things that we are going to have to debate, which is it okay to get to our 80 by 30 goal with the purchase of natural gas offsets? Or do we have to get to 80 by 30 with true emissions reductions alone? So that's one of the philosophical debates that we expect council to take up the next time we meet with them.
Thank you.
And I see Ms. Starlack has a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Commissioner Suma for her comments. I would say that CEQA supports your vision for Palo Alto. I think that neighborhoods that are walkable, jobs and housing that are more in balance is exactly what CEQA is getting at, and will in effect kind of reward. You'll be able to get in without an impact if you can create those things. So I just wanted to mention a couple things, since I am a former Safe Routes to School coordinator for the city of Palo Alto. I understand the Safe Routes to School program to be the most successful TDM program that the city of Palo Alto does. And, you know, with a third of students, K through 12, biking to school, that is tremendous. It's probably the best in the country, I will say it. So I just want to say that not every TDM program is not effective. I also left Stanford's TDM program to jump to this TDM program. And Stanford's program is also nationally recognized. And I think I understand. I think I know what you're saying. I think you're saying TDM programs that are sometimes conditions of approval might not work on certain employment centers or certain employers. I think TDM is all about how it's all the devil's in the details with TDM. And that's partly why I'm so excited to move forward with the TDM ordinance update. That TDM ordinance is going to have to do a lot of things. And it's going to have to comply with CEQA. It's going to have to comply with the comp plan policy that was written in there. It's got like 8 legs in the comp plan. There's like 8 tentacles of it. And I'm just really super excited. So I wanted to mention those things. Also, I appreciate your skepticism about VMT. When we come back with the VMT item, we're going to bring the consultants, and you can, you know, throw at them every question you have about VMT, because I can't answer it right now. And the final thing is that I'm really glad that the commission is attuned to the social equity piece. I mean, it is timely, and I think there's a lot of, you know, structural inequalities built into a lot of planning, frankly. It's not necessarily intentional, but it's there. And I think for things like forcing, you know, if we're going to mandate that people buy an EV, we have to be aware of, you know, we have to do it in a way where we're not exacerbating existing inequities. I think there are other parts of planning that have also, unfortunately, led to other inequities. And so I think that planning staff, I think transportation and planning staff are really interested in looking at how our actions, you know, affect social equity. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Thank you.
And thank you for reminding me that the safe routes to school, I don't even think of that as TDM, to be honest. And so thank you for correcting me and reminding me of its great success, because it is great.
We know how to do TDM. We just have to, you know, it's it takes time and resources and staff, but you can do it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all for a wonderful interchange. So commissioners who have not yet spoken, if you want to raise your hand to speak, now would be a good time. All right, Commissioner Lowing, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm going to focus at your request mostly on slides 7 and 8, which is mobility and electric vehicles. I just want to start by saying that you mentioned that the council had in 2016 put together an ambitious goal that's outlined here, and it is. And my concern is that particularly with the corona, that it's too ambitious, and as we've already touched on, some of the areas are getting a little bit too unrealistic with the good intentions of you got to do something to make the gap from here to there close. So let's look at the, again, mostly not in-home stuff, but I do want to echo something that Commissioner Suma said. I just can't see I can't see us coming to saying that, in such and such a year, up to this point, you can have whatever you want. And then in that year, 2030, you got to take out your stove, your hot water heater, all that. I mean, that's just too much kind of government making the decision for you. So I think we have to be really careful about that kind of stuff. And even such things as, requiring an appliance of electrification of hot water heater by 2030, maybe, but that's going to need some buy-in from the community. And overall, all this stuff is about who's going to pay. If you say we want you to have an electric stove and we're going to deliver it to your door, that's entirely different than saying you got to do it. I don't know how you're going to pay for it. And the same thing, frankly, with cars. If we're going to deliver Priuses to everybody that wants one, that's one strategy, but it's not practical at all. So let me shift to the slide 7 and talk about B and C first. The concern there, first and foremost, I think, when you're talking about the availability of transit, shared mobility, and land use mix supporting transit, there's a couple issues there, and they start with COVID, because it's just people aren't going to be wanting to take that transportation, and I don't think COVID's over in 6 months, vaccine or not. So I think we have to be realistic. That has dampened your attempts here, to crank that one up and just recalculate that kind of situation. And the same thing with housing density, and the same thing with transit. SOV percentage, I think, is going to be going up of the number of people that are driving. People are going to want to stay out of trains and buses, etc. So that's going to go up. The other issue that's embedded here is this whole assumption that we're going to have a lot of high quality transit that we can build dense housing next to. And that's always a question mark in my mind, because we don't have good transportation. We don't have a great train system. We don't have a great regional bus system. When we talk about the high quality, whatever it was, the 13 bus that one night, it just doesn't make any sense because it's not there yet. So I think we have to be realistic about what our current situation is and build from there. And I do agree that someday, as Dr. Riggs just said, we can put in a regional transit and make something like San Antonio, better off, but we don't have it right now. So relative to this night's agenda, I think you have to be quite realistic about that. Then moving to D, on the other hand, as we've been discussing, I think your VMT is going to be going down. At least in the short term, it already is. And we'll see. It seems like there's, even on this dais, there's a debate between those two alternatives of if it's going to go up or not going to go up. But if it goes down, then you kind of get a free benefit here. So it's hard enough. You should get something free, and this is going to be free for you. And usually we talk about collateral damage. This could be a collateral benefit that could start a trend, and it could work out fine. But when you start talking about penalties for having an EV, as opposed to incentives for having an EV, you kind of lose me there, because, and I'll get to that in a minute, I think we should be doing incentive programs. So that's it, high level on that slide. SOV percentage, I think, goes up. BMT miles, I think, go down. On the EV slide, number 8, this is already touched on, so I'm not going to drill down on it too much, but you want to go up to 42,000 vehicles, which is basically a 10x baseline from where we are. And those are exactly the right numbers that I had picked up somewhere, maybe from you guys in a prior meeting, but we have about 7% penetration. And you're trying to get up to 80% penetration. Good grief, that is quite an acceleration. And as has been pointed out, which I also was going to mention, is the equity issue is very important. The other issue is that some people just like driving a car, and that doesn't happen to be electric, or it might have been dad's, or they might want a classic car as their second car. So we just have to be realistic about the choices that citizens want to make, and not try to dictate the stuff to them. And again, the question there is who pays for all this. So some of these things I just don't think are possible, and I think we should readjust both the goal a little bit and the tactics of getting there so we can meet a goal, which sort of takes me to my third point, and I'll use a business example. You need to have a goal that's achievable, and it also has to have a benefit when you achieve it. Hopefully a benefit that has a carrot at the end that you get to eat, not a stick. That's a bad example because I don't like carrots, but that's the cliche. Okay, so I was trying to think of an example here, and the example I came up with is a commission salesperson in a business, right? So if you give that commission salesperson an extraordinarily high quota that he or she has to make, it's out of reach. That person just isn't going to work. And if you give them a real low quota, it's so easy, they're not going to work. So you have to have something in the middle, I don't know, sort of a Goldilocks thing, where the porridge is just right, so that you get this reaching out, this I want to accomplish this goal. And at the end, then they accomplish something, and they get, in this case, what's the carrot, and that's usually the commission check. So that's what I mean in terms of the incentives. I think EVs, we should be giving incentives, whatever that can be. I don't think this ICE tax, or good grief, banning ICE vehicles entirely I don't think we should be studying that at all. Don't pay for a legal opinion. That should just be off the table. That's just out of line for our citizens. So let's see where my notes go. Or the one where in mobility, to improve that, we're going to mandate telework for 2 days a week. We can't do that. And we can't tell corporations that a given person has to work at home 2 days a week, or if that's already the person's setup and they change jobs, they can't be kept from going to another job because that new employer won't allow it. So I just think some of these things ought to be pulled off the board, so that we're spending our energy on much more productive things. One of the things, I'll just give an example, it won't take long. One of the things I think we should do is on the educational low intervention side, is really move forward with some of this educational stuff. The graph that you showed, because of what we deal with here, I mean, we kind of understand that. We would expect that the biggest problems are coming from gas, and particularly gasoline in our cars. But that's not obvious. My wife took a class at Stanford in how to reduce your carbon reduction because she wanted to be conscientious about that. She wanted us to be conscientious about that. And took a number of lectures and so on. And then toward the end, they did an assessment. And she came back and she said, I don't get this assessment at all. We have got like the lowest possible carbon, and we have a gas stove, and we have a biggish kind of house, although only 2 people. Because I knew that graph, I knew the answer, which is that we have 2 internal combustion cars, which we rarely drive. So we're just not doing VMT. And that's what it is. So my point here, the reason I'm bringing this up is I think if that sort of now, to me, quite obvious thing is put to the public, maybe in an insert in their electric bill, do an assessment of your carbon and they see that, what they could do is the carrot could be, I'm a better citizen. And if you created a little competition with the neighborhood, they would also like to be better than their neighbor and, kind of getting this thing down. So it's just one example of ways that you could get, I think, people voluntarily doing this. And then just lastly, I wanted to go to the other side of the spectrum because I read a lot of the individual comments that came in, and one or two of them said, we shouldn't do anything because if we're the only town doing it, it won't make any difference at all. Well, we all get that that's the math, but that's off the board as well. It's up to us. We need to start on this. We need to continue on this. So the goals are admirable, but they're beyond reach goals. And I would just encourage all of us as a city to, forward with real achievable reach goals, and then pick the right things that are going to be, realistic way of getting there. So that's kind of my overview comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Lowing. Did staff want to respond to any of the ideas shared?
Sure, I'll take the first stab. So thank you, Commissioner. To the point about, why is one city, what difference does one city make? Well, in general, we need cities to care because cities produce 70 to 75% of the world's greenhouse gases. So since cities are responsible for the majority of the greenhouse gas emissions, we have a responsibility to figure out how to curtail them. And we're in a situation where the California's goal is that the state of California needs to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. Palo Alto decided that we were going to reduce our emissions 20 years ahead of the state goal, but we do by 2050 have to reduce our emissions 80%. We're just saying we can get there faster. And part of the reason why we have these goals is if we allow climate change to go unmitigated, we're going to see some really disastrous things, especially in Palo Alto. So for example, worst case scenario, by the end of the century, our sea level is going to rise to the point where all of Middlefield Road is underwater. That's the worst case scenario. So that's why we kind of have this sense of urgency to figure out how to reduce our emissions, because that's a lot of people going all the way to Middlefield Road, all those houses underwater. The best case scenario is that the water will go to 101 if we don't do anything. So neither of those situations are very good prospects for our area.
My comment, if it wasn't clear, was I'm saying that all cities should do this. But a couple of members of the public that you took some comments from said that other cities aren't going to do it, so why should we bother? Because we won't be able to make a difference. And I'm saying that's completely flawed logic. And absolutely everybody should be doing it, and we can even lead in that. So I'm saying I'm rejecting that, stand back and do nothing because we can't fix it. That we already know that, and there are third world countries for which the problem is even worse. But it is our responsibility to work for our citizens to make these changes, and I applaud it. I support it. I'm just saying that let's make sure that we're doing the right practical things to do as best as we doggone can. And if we're already going to get up to 50% without too much problem on EVs, I think you should take some credit for that too.
I think that's a great point, Commissioner Lowing, and I think, Christine, you may be frozen, not sure. But I think that part of what Christine was going towards, to underscore your point that we need to work on climate change, is that because we have this accelerated goal as a city of meeting this goal, I heard 20 years prior to the state, it would require some pretty drastic strategies, which I think is what you're kind of picking up on, charging people for a combustion engine, forcing people to essentially only have electric cars via some registration process, which I think Commissioner Riggs said, I don't think that's legal, and we have questions about that too. And so it's kind of saying, if we're really serious and our vehicles is our hardest thing, these are things we might have to do if we're going to do it in 10 years, which is pretty soon, I think, for most of us. So I think your comment's well placed. And Christine, I think she may have had to log off and log back in. Looks like.
Yeah.
I think
Like-
so. She's not quite back yet. Oh, here she comes.
Okay.
I also wanted to just make a comment that I think it's important that Commissioner Lowing brought up some of the comments to allow staff to speak to them and for the benefit of the public, right? So I think that was your intention, was to bring it up, and I think that was also Ms. Long's intention to inform people, not necessarily the ones that are in this meeting tonight, but for the sake of the record, to be able to speak to it. So I think it was really helpful. Ms. Long, did you have any more comments before we go to Ms. Starlack?
You might be frozen again.
Yeah.
Maybe try just being on voice. Video might be slowing down your connection. Sylvia, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I do. Should I turn off my video?
You're fine, at least on
Yeah,
my
you're fine.
Okay. Yeah, I really wanted to thank Commissioner Lang for his comments. All of those things that you said went through our minds as we were putting this together. I mean, there were parts of this where I was literally typing and going, I can't believe I am typing that I want to ban internal combustion engines from, like, it didn't, in all my years as a transportation planner, I would never think to say that. But that's where we are. And that's why we put up the spectrum of tools as a conceptual framework. You know, we are trying to do what we can with education and voluntary measures. And I agree with you, we could do a lot more. I love that your wife took that class. Like, we should all take that class. That's the kind of thing, you know, I again, with my Safe Routes background, I love teaching those classes to people about how they can incorporate bikes into their lives. You know, we talk a lot about EVs, and I want to say, you know, a bike is like an EV. It's also zero emission, you know, like, so, you know, think about those a little more. Can you include those in your life? But I do want to also address the comments about transit. And this is something that because I am relatively, because I'm new to PTC, I'm not sure if you've discussed this before, but, you know, I'm sure you've discussed VTA's recent changes in their service plan. And as you know, so recently they reimagined their network and decided that they were going to focus more on frequency rather than coverage of the county, right? Their zone is all of Santa Clara County. So they decided that where they wanted to put transit is where land use supports frequent transit, basically. And their new strategy involved removing service from Palo Alto. VTA staff have told, there was a finance committee meeting they attended, and they said, look, VTA will reward cities with transit if those cities do the right thing with their land use and create transit supportive corridors. We unfortunately just recently had to kill the budget. I mean, we had to reduce the budget for our shuttles. So we now no longer have a Palo Alto shuttle. We no longer have a crosstown shuttle. We no longer have an Embarcadero shuttle. And so we keep, you know, we don't have enough transit in town. And the only way we're going to get it is if we create transit corridors that can support it. So I just wanted to mention that, and it's going to take time. It's not going to be necessarily like tomorrow. We could just call VTA and say, we need some transit on the San Antonio corridor, for example, because maybe there'll be more housing there. No, I think VTA is going to be like, show us the housing and we'll show you the transit. So, or show us the zoning and we'll show you the transit. I mean, I don't know, but I just wanted to mention that because these are the conversations that I'm having in the background with staff about how are we, you know, what's this going to look like moving forward? And you're right, the COVID variable really does kind of mess a bunch of things up in terms of SOV use. And I'm really hoping that, you know, as we know, bike use is skyrocketing. A lot of people are buying e-bikes now because maybe they don't feel like they can, pedal themselves, but an e-bike actually gives them more range and they don't have to work so hard. So that's a lot. And I just wanted to mention those things. I loved your comments. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for those comments, Ms. Starlack. Ms. Long, did you have anything else you wanted to add? I know we had a technical difficulty there, so I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, yeah, sorry, my Zoom went out. I did also want to address one thing that a few commissioners have mentioned already in terms of the electric vehicle goal. So believe it or not, our 2016 climate action plan actually had a goal of getting to 90% penetration for electric vehicles, and we readjusted that to 80% because that's what staff thinks is realistic. We also have a great deal of money in the millions coming in from our low carbon fuel standard fund, and staff is currently looking at all the ways to spend that money, and which includes incentives for low income EV ownership. We are looking at San Mateo County currently has a plan in place that allows low-income families to purchase a secondhand electric vehicle for $2,000, I believe it is. So we are looking into a similar program for Palo Alto to see if we can use our low carbon fuel standard funds to improve some of the equity issues that have been raised.
That's great. I didn't know about that. Oh, Ms. Starlack, you have another comment?
Sorry, I meant to mention one more thing about transit and how we don't have a budget for transit. One revenue stream potentially could be parking pricing, parking permit revenue. So I know Nate Baird is in the meeting, but so he can speak to this. But one way that we could fund transit in town, if we wanted to do like a local community shuttle again, is with parking pricing. Yeah, I guess that's all I'll say right now. I don't know, Nate, if you want to speak to that.
And I will say I entirely agree. And so these are definitely something that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of how to structure a helpful conversation that can get everybody on the same page about what that could look like as a proof of concept in the country on how to do something like this to help transit and to help climate action goals. That's a really great way to prioritize it, and it could be prioritized that way, but we need to have a good conversation about it publicly, and we need to have a conversation that brings everybody on board. So that's the difficulty level of what we're talking about right now.
And just as a factoid, Stanford University's parking fees goes to fund its TDM program, including Marguerite.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for joining us again, Mr. Baird. All right, Commissioner Lowing, is there any other questions or comments? You're all set? Okay. Commissioner Alchek.
Okay. So I don't support the approach of requiring this transition. And I mean, this is a very serious topic. It's almost funny that you're saying, we thought we would do 90%, but we dialed it back and decided 80% was the target or realistic target. I think my biggest frustration with this approach is that I think it lacks awareness. It's to me, it demonstrates a lack of awareness of what's feasible from the side of the table which executes the transition. So, I mean, it's not so much that I'm worried that Palo Alto will be the only city that does it. I'm worried that every city on the peninsula will follow this suit, and this will have a dramatic impact on the affordability of housing. I'll give you a quick example. I don't know if there's statistics on the percentage of our multifamily housing stock, which was built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but I would venture to say that it probably represents over 80% of our multifamily housing stock on the peninsula. I think, for example, if you drive through Belmont, you'll see that every building there was, erected in the last 40 or 50 years. I make that point because none of those buildings can handle the electrical demands that we are tossing around as if it's simply something you buy on Amazon and install. And the worst part about it is that what you're identifying as the popularity of electric bicycles is entirely because of the marketplace and how improved those electric bicycles have become, how cheap they've become and accessible. And so that's an example where no one's demanded that individuals rely on electric bicycles or bicycles that they can choose as opposed to cars 6 days a week. And that's driven up the demand of electric bicycles. Electric bicycles become popular because the price point has come down. They are superb. They deliver you from point A to point B comfortably. People are beginning to appreciate the appeal. The problem is, and this is something that I think too many people don't appreciate in the building requirements departments, is that every single thing that you plug into the wall will draw 1, 2, 3, or 5 amps. And the circuit breaker boxes in 80% of the apartments on the peninsula have like 60 amps total, maybe. They might have 4 or 5 15 amp breakers. And it's all about fast charging now, right? You get a bike and you can do the slow charger, or you can get the fast charger, which is going to draw more amps. Every iPad is drawing 2 to 3 amps. Every Mac and every TV, everybody's leaving their components plugged in all day long. And then these water heaters, for example, these instant water heaters as opposed to gas water heaters, these are intense mechanical tools. They use a tremendous amount of energy very quickly, as opposed to maintaining the temperature of water for a very long time. I understand the benefits. I think that the consequence of suggesting or requiring multifamily to transition by 2030, any of those, let me pull it up real quick. I mean, whether it's gas furnaces, gas stove. I mean, I just want this. It's so ironic because in the last, decade, I've seen multifamily residential move towards gas in an effort to have a system that will work with all the plugins that a typical 2-bedroom tenant will bring to the 1970s apartment building they're living in. A lot of these apartment buildings have 2-prong outlets. They're plugging in 100 different things and suddenly the stove isn't going to work. There's too much draw on the apartment. So they're retrofitting gas if they can figure out a way to bring it in, because that's the only power source. That the heating is the most intense use of power. This goes for laundry too. It's slowly becoming commonplace for multifamily residential units to have in-unit laundry. The fad of going to your local laundromat is out. Laundry rooms are undesirable for peninsula residents. So in-unit laundry machines are becoming very popular, and a workaround to the plumbing requirements are these very they have these unique units that don't require as much plumbing and venting, almost ventless machines. That's another system that's drawing a lot of energy. I think that the consequence of this approach is going to increase the cost of housing exponentially. And it seems like Palo Alto, I shouldn't say that, because I would also suggest to you that there's no way this flies. There's no way that the community is going to support this. But I would suggest to you that there is a problem if we are so prepared to shell out the capital that would be required to make this transition and assume that the entire community of people in the peninsula who can barely afford to live here should just jump on the bandwagon because we're all progressive thinkers. And look, I don't want to suggest to you I have some sort of climate denying philosophy here. I absolutely appreciate this notion that we may be underwater in our children's lifetime. And I subscribe to many of these, ideals. I began commuting just last summer, the summer before this one, on my bike to work several times a week. This is a behavior I'm attempting to adopt in my life, right? And I would imagine we've had conversations where the next vehicle purchase will likely be an electric one, but requiring it is a problem. I think that if you wanted to suggest, for example, taxing use in the city, like the way London has a vehicle tax in city, where you wanted to increase the disincentive to using your vehicle for local in-town trips, okay, that's one stick, if you will, that I could get behind. But requiring a homeowner who has an otherwise operating unit to retrofit it, I think is a mistake. I think I think it's a mistake on a single family residential perspective because it in my opinion, it's too expensive for the individual owner to do without, having anticipated that capital requirement in advance. And I think it's a tremendous mistake on the multifamily front, which I appreciate is a tremendous opportunity to save, to claw back some of those greenhouse gases. But I think it's going to exacerbate the problem of affordable housing. And it's ironic that we're having this conversation, and the flip side of it is, well, if we zone for more of this dense, affordable housing, then VTA will start serving us again. At the same time, I think half of this discussion is talking about changes that would make the affordability of our housing significantly lower. And so I wouldn't support some of these goals in their current execution. I think what is a target if it's not, if we don't require it? It's kind of like what they did with the light bulbs. They just required the stores not to carry them, right? You couldn't carry incandescents anymore. They had to be fluorescents, and the access to purchase them became quite difficult. And as a result, builders started to exclusively use LED. LEDs significantly more expensive. The increase in demand to use LED in California brought the prices down because now the marketplace was competing to get those purchases because the price was so high. So I would suggest that we need to come up with a different tactic, whether we encourage competition through requiring new purchases to be X, okay, or all new construction to comply. I think we're probably already there. But there is a significant chance that you're going to require that in 2031, there's an individual, maybe a retiree or maybe a young family, who's required to do a retrofit that will tip a domino, right? First, it's, well, we can't use this gas heater, water heater. So we need to get this electric one. Okay, bring it in. Oh, wait a minute. We don't have the amperage. We need to bring in the electrician. Oh, we're going to need a new meter. We're going to need that 400 because the 200 or 100 that this 50-year-old house has is no longer adequate. Oh, now I need to pay for I mean, I think it's a problem. And I don't want to suggest to you I have the answers. of how to solve it. And I wouldn't suggest to you that I'm some sort of behavioral economist that can come up with an answer. I'm not. But I'll give you one more anecdote. Not too long ago, then Assistant Director Late was before us about gas leaf blowers. The irony was not lost on me. The hypocrisy was not lost on me that all single family homeowners were expected to immediately eliminate the use of gas leaf blowers on their property. Do you know what properties weren't required to eliminate the use of gas blowers? The city's properties. Every park, every school, and for good reason, because that would have required a labor expense and possibly an equipment expense that was far too expensive for the schools to absorb or for the parks department to absorb. And I get it. We can't tank our local budget with the requirement. We have to balance it. It was really easy for the department, and I don't know who it was, to decide, well, put that cost on the single family homeowners, they'll deal with it. But we didn't require it of our golf course. We didn't require it of our local schools, and we don't require, I mean, that might be school district, I don't know, but we don't require it of our libraries. We don't require it of our city's city hall. And I think it's a sign that I think look, that was easy in theory to just overcome that problem. I think this is different. I think that we need to come up with an approach that creates incentives as opposed to requirements. And I would add that I also think that the distinction that upon sale, all of these changes have to happen is a really good way to make the case that you're upping the price. This house you could sell in 2028 as is. In 2030, this same house will require the following retrofits. All of this equipment new, right? And so if at say, I think on page, let's see here, electrify gas appliances in single family homes upon sale beginning in 2025. I can't think of something that you could do today that would increase would reduce the affordability of our housing stock more than that sentence. And for me, I'm really grappling with that. And I once had a conversation with our current city council member, Allison Cormack, and I said to her, I think affordable housing is the #1 priority in our town. And she suggested that, there are other priorities. And I remember her saying something about this sea level rise. And I, in somewhat of, off the cuff, suggested, look, you can't care about your home flooding if you don't have one. And my point here is that we can't, I'm not suggesting that we ignore the sea level rise. I'm suggesting we have to approach this with a sensitivity to the affordability of our housing, whether it's single family or multifamily. And maybe there's a way that there could be and this is my last comment, maybe there's a way that some analysis can be done that demonstrates the projected increase in costs of ownership associated with this. So you put a line item that says all home sales require electrification. Go pick a home, go pick 5 homes. One that was built in the 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, and 2010s in the community. I don't know how you would do that, but pick 5, do a quick feasibility study, figure out what will be required on each home to meet that goal in 2025, so that residents, not just residents, so you, so me, so city council could say, wow, so if you're sitting in a home built in 1970, you're looking at $16,000. Get an electrician to bid it, get a plumber to bid it. Because without that info, without that data suggesting how the affordability goes up, I think we're ignoring the second maybe the other biggest priority in our community above climate change, which is how to afford to live here for members of our community. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Alcheck. Did staff want to respond to any of the comments?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Alcheck made some really great comments. I think one of the main kind of themes of your comments is really about not just affordability overall, but that speaks to the practicality of these ideas, right? So I'm wondering if Ms. Luong, if you can talk a little bit about how the study or the next steps, because I think there's the calculation of, okay, option strategy 1, how much GHG will this reduce over what period of time? And that's a great number to say which strategies are most effective. But then there's the other side, which is what's the cost in dollars and cents and other social goods or equity or these other things that might make these things untenable, whether it's that we don't believe in forcing people to do stuff as a political philosophy and a way of governing, or yes, we could retrofit every home, but the cost of that is prohibitive, the impact on affordability is prohibitive, and therefore, though effective, may not actually be realized. So why would we, focus on that type of activity if it's really not going to get us where we need to go? So maybe, Ms. Long, you can speak a little bit to how there's the GHG calculation and maybe this other screen of kind of what will be able to be implemented to move us where we want to go.
Sure. And thank you for raising all these issues around affordability and everything else you just brought up, Commissioner. Our directive was to come up with a whole host of possible key actions that could get us to 80 by 30 without sort of ruling any of them out based on feasibility or legality, or to just dump them all on the table, and then AECOM will do the analysis. So AECOM is going to look at all of our suggestions and look at not only what is the potential greenhouse gas reduction potential of the actions we've proposed, but also how much it would cost. So we'll have a cost per metric ton of CO2 reduced metric, and then also to look at the sustainability co-benefits. So we are currently getting feedback on the sustainability co-benefits that matter to the most to the community. Those include things like cost of living, equity, indoor air quality, productivity. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but affordability is embedded in some of those sustainability co-benefits. So we will then take all of that data to then further refine the key actions. Some of them are probably going to be rolled out just because they will be cost prohibitive. They might, for example, banning all ICE cars. That would get us to our 80 by 30 goal, but that would probably be way too cost prohibitive for us to be able to implement. So,
if I could just say, I think if that's the intent to have that analysis done at some future time, I would really, because cost per metric ton might be a number that you can relate to and understand, but I would really encourage staff and yourself also to consider some real examples, like if you want to treat them as case studies, because you may surprise people. Maybe you'll surprise people and they go, wow, electrification wouldn't cost that much. But I think for the community to really debate this, it can't just be graphs that suggest cost per metric ton or the increased what is the dollar value of better air quality or productivity. I think we also just need some examples, and you may find that there are volunteers. There may be members in the community who would volunteer their home for a feasibility study, and you can create a nice diverse sort of data set.
And that is a great suggestion. It's something that the Utilities Department has already been looking into. A lot of this, with the last REACH code cycle, we did do a study to see what is cost effective. So for us to be able to, and I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but for us to be able to introduce new changes to the REACH code, everything that we introduce has to be cost effective when it comes to the energy REACH code. So the recommendations in the energy REACH code were to require all new homes and low-rise multifamily buildings of 3 stories or less to be all electric. And that was only possible because it costs less than to have a mixed fuel home. And that's also why we did not have the same requirements for commercial, because some of the large commercial, it is not cost effective to switch to all electric. So with that, and I'm not the expert in that area, but they did do like a cost breakdown for how much it would cost to electrify a home and what the overall savings would be. And from some of the, I wouldn't call them pilots, but from some of the early adopters and the lessons learned are that currently one of the biggest barriers to electrification is the city's internal permitting process. And for us to be able to include electrification as a key action, we need to address the permitting process or it just won't work.
Thank you, Christine, for that. And I think I also appreciate Commissioner Alczyk's kind of comments around how do we make sure people can understand what we get out of the study. And I think that will be part of what Christine and the multi-department team is to try to turn some of these things into real numbers that mean things to regular people. And I think, in addition to just the overall cost, we'll be thinking through who bears that cost. So a high price tag, someone might say, well, it's fine if someone else is paying for it. And I think your leaf blower example is an excellent one. Of just how do we say who is bearing the cost of implementing some of these new policies and what funding sources might be available for them to lessen that burden, especially with the equity focus. Sylvia, if you had any comments, I welcome you to make them. And I don't know if if there's anything else that Commissioner Alczyk wants to say.
I don't really. I'm interested in his new bike commute, which we can talk about some other time. But other than that, I appreciate the focus on affordability, practicality, and just implementability.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. Thank you, Commissioner Alczyk. Commissioner Heckman, would you like a bite at this apple? All right.
Yes, and thank you. I have to confess, I thought when I read this staff report over the weekend, maybe we'll be done by 6:45, but this has turned out to be, to me, one of the most fascinating, interesting dialogues we've had with every commissioner that's spoken so far, really bringing a different perspective and a different idea and focus to really, I think, flesh out the complexities of this. And so I'm appreciative that I just get to participate, and I'm appreciative of the work that staff has done to deliver this document to us. I did have a couple kind of big picture, just overview questions. First of all, Sylvia, you mentioned a July, coming back on July 8th are we going to hear this again in 14 days?
You're going to hear the item about recent changes to the California Environmental Quality Act that have to do with transportation analysis. So okay. That's what you will hear. And it fits into all of this conversation.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is this the first time that this has come to the PTC since 2016?
Christine, have you brought this to the PTC previously? Or some version of it?
It wasn't, I wasn't involved in the 2016 version, so I don't know about that time. But in terms of the 2020 SCAP, this, I believe, is the first time we've come to PTC.
So thank you. I'm still trying to get my arms around what comes to the PTC and when. And this, it seems like the heart of this issue is planning and transportation. And I was interested in the fact that this has been at the council 3, 4, 5 times, and this might be our first look at it. So I don't know if there's a short answer as to why that is, or maybe this is something should be taken offline. But again, it seems like we should be deeply involved, and clearly the commissioners have, you know, ideas worth building into the process.
Yeah, I think unfortunately myself and Sylvia are relatively new to staffing the PTC. Albert's probably our longest serving person here. And I don't know, Christine, if you can reflect perhaps broadly on just the process of the SCAP. Because I know there's been some other local bodies that have been created and advisory bodies. And so I think there was a specific group of citizens that were really charged with some of this work. And that may have been some of the reason things were not coming to the PTC, perhaps in the same way that this is coming forward. Is that true, Christine? Am I making that up?
Yeah, so for the 2016 SCAP process, there was a sustainability, I don't remember what they were called, it was like a task force that helped the former chief sustainability officer come up with a lot of the items in that SCAP. There was also a SCAP summit that had about 500 community members go to that really drove what was in the 2016 SCAP. So one of the, it's sort of the cart before the horse for the last SCAP process. The community generated a lot of the ideas, and then the consultants went and did the analysis, and then they went to council. So council had pretty much no feedback on the process until the final product was presented. And at that point, all these wonderful discussions we're having tonight, they never happened, and they all happened on that final night. And that is part of the reason why that version of the SCAP was not approved in full, only the goal and the framework, because they didn't have this very robust discussion that we're having tonight. So for the 2020 SCAP process, we decided up front that we wanted to go to council more before it goes to the consultants for analysis. So we've gone to council twice. This first time in January, it was just an informational report to let them know that we were launching the process. We went to council, not related to the SCAP, but we also went to council for our annual Earth Day report, which is a progress report of the previous year's sustainability progress. And then we went to council on our sustainability work plan. But in terms of just the SCAP itself, we went to council in April and then in June. And I'm not sure how involved the commissions were in the 2016 process, but for this process, we did want to involve 3 commissions, UAC, PTC, and PRC, more heavily before AECOM starts their modeling and their impact analysis, so that we can get your feedback before too much work is done. And then after that, we're going to sort of regroup, see what AECOM and Fair and Peers come back with, and then staff is going to look through everything, look at the feasibility, look at the legality, the co-benefits, the affordability, all of those factors, and hopefully come up with a package of options that can then be discussed further before it goes to council again for a final approval. And, you know, one of the sort of scenarios might be, for example, we could have, you know, one scenario where we do some of these high intervention things and there's a lot of pain points. If you really want to do true emissions reductions to get to 80 by 30, one scenario might be, you know what, we can get to 80 by 30, but only if we continue the purchase of natural gas offsets. And then we will have true emissions reductions to get, you know, so we have 80 by 40 or 80 by 50 will be true emissions reductions, but, you know, 80 by 30 will have to use some natural gas offsets to get there. So, you know, everything that we presented tonight and that was included in the packet, they're all up for discussion and debate, and we're really glad that the commissioners have been so engaged with this, because this is very helpful for us as well.
Thank you, Christine.
All right, so
Commissioner Heckman, do you have more questions?
oh yes.
Excellent.
But on this point, I would hope that when the studies are done, that it comes back through PTC on its way to council rather than after council, so that we can add our voice and thoughts to those studies. I think we're more useful in that role than in a reactive role after it's been to council. So really, I'm hoping to get a better understanding of the goals, and I do incidentally understand here sort of staff's charge is they've been given a directive by the city council. We want to meet our GHG goals 20 years earlier than the state says we need to. So what would that look like? And as one of the staff members said, nothing is off the table in asking that question. And so I understand that I understand better now that we've had this discussion that being here, because actually as I read through this without really understanding that, some of these things seem to me wholly unrealistic. But they may be, and I think Sylvia, your point was staff thinks that some of them may be wholly unrealistic too, but we're going to look at them and we're going to get some empirical proof if they're wholly unrealistic. So, and I appreciate that. So, but I do want to try to understand these potential major goals that, as I understand, you're now going to deliver to ACON to analyze from a data perspective. And so what I'm looking at is packet page 19, where you've got all of the potential major goals on one page. I don't know if you can pull that up, or if you have a different page as part of the presentation, one for energy, one for mobility, and one for electric vehicles. Either one will work, but I think it'll be easier if we're looking at those major goals. So energy is the first one, and it had, you know, a goal and then an ABC following it.
Can you pull that up, Christine? Oh, you are muted.
I think she's pulling it up, looks like.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes, sorry.
That's okay. So let's start with the one on the top of the page, energy.
Okay.
Thank you. So one of the graphs you showed during the presentation, and I just didn't write down the figure, is the natural gas component of what we're trying to achieve. Is the number was, it's the smaller percentage. I mean, if we were completely, if we eliminated 80% of the gas, of the natural gas by 2030, that's not an 80% reduction of GHG. It's just a percentage of that. Is that correct? Did I understand that right?
Correct. So of our remaining sources, natural gas is about 1/3 and road transportation is about 2/3.
Okay, that's right. So help me understand that we have, it looks like in this energy, 3 choices or possibly 6. So let me just ask on line A, is 40% below 1990 level the same as 24% below 2018, or are those 2 different possible standards?
Great question. So we've actually changed this because it is confusing. But so for energy, the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the direct use of natural gas in Palo Alto's building sector. What we don't know is what the final percentages will be. So we want to wait and see what the analysis from AECOM is before we say if that's going to be 40% below, 60% below, 80% below. So it's, yeah, there's a footnote, but not many people read the footnote. So we've changed this wording because it is too confusing. But yes, we know we want to reduce the use of natural gas, but we don't know by what percentage yet, and that will be dependent on AECOM's analysis.
Okay. And I actually do read the footnotes. There's a con law professor at Hastings who was known for saying, if you don't read the footnotes, your babies will go hungry. So very important. But I'm still, and so I do understand the difference between the 40, 60, and 80 that AECOM's going to look at those. But is the 40 the same or different from the 24, for example? Is that
right? It's the 24 below the 2018 level, correct? That's the same.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And so one of the things you're hoping that this study will result in is a data-driven recommendation of which of those 3 potential levels you need to be at to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, and then moving to mobility, which is on your screen there. The question I had in point B, or action B, I guess, key action B, in order to reduce, if we're going to increase the proportion of residents within a quarter-mile watershed of frequent transit corridors in order to get from our 61% to our 100%, is there a calculation yet of how many residents we're talking about, or is that something that will come out of the AECOM study?
So this one might come out of the modeling that is done. This one could, so yeah, I can't tell you what that would be. I mean, because population is going to increase. So one way to do this would be to direct growth to particular locations where we might want transit to be occurring. So, okay. Yeah. So
I mean,
we can model that.
Right. Because to me, I mean, B is, to my thinking, one of the clear ways we move in the direction of our goal. But I think we're going to need a quantification of what that looks like to reach our goal in any amount of time. So I am hoping that some answers in that regard will come out of the study. So we have a sense of, well, that means, of Palo Alto's anticipated growth of 20,000 people in the next 15 years, 2/3 of those people have to live within a quarter-mile of transit, whatever the numbers are.
That's what I'm hoping. That's exactly the level that of data that I was hoping for. Something like that, so we can all understand what that means and what that might look like. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, then help me understand the relationship between mobility and electric vehicles here. So between these two categories, we've got 2/3 of our GHG production that we're going to try to get rid of, right? And so these key actions, will each of those take a bite out of the reduction, or are these 5 actions, actually some of them are, some of them aren't, but for example, if we go to electric vehicles A, increasing the EVs from 4,500 to 42,000, if that actually happened, would that solve, that alone would hit our number?
Yeah,
pretty much.
That's why we have the same goal. And so, and we wanted to give, I mean, A is unrealistic. I mean, or maybe it's not unrealistic. It's just really expensive and has may have other bad effects. But yeah, we wanted to kind of provide all of a combination so that council could pick and choose like from a menu of items.
So are there any other of the mobility or electric vehicle key actions that also would, standing alone, get us where we're going? It didn't seem like it to me. Like B. Oh, I'm just on that page I meant.
Oh, just on that page.
Yeah. So, for example, the electric vehicles B, the only thing we did was increase the share of EV commute vehicles from single digits to 80%. With that alone, get the reduction we need.
It would get us close. Yeah.
It would get us close. I'm not sure. Those are commute vehicles. So, you know, there's cargo, there are other vehicles. So, and those other heavy vehicles pollute a lot. But yeah.
All right. All right. So to me, there's kind of a mixture of potential key actions here. Some will take us part of the way, some to the extent they're feasible. Some would take us all the way to the extent they're feasible. All right. Then really the only other thing I want to express concern about is at the end of this process, we have to have a realistic plan forward. And I think a number of the commissioners touched on this, and I don't have any reason to believe that staff has not seen it the same way. I understand the council has given us a direction to make this happen by 2030. But to my thinking, it is an acceptable and appropriate answer if the data suggests it to say, we're not going to get there realistically, but here's where we can get, taking into consideration all of these factors. And that's really where I believe this process is going to end up, but I think we need to recognize that on the front end rather than kind of be surprised and be forced into some kind of admission of failure for not finding a way to get it done when really from the day it was envisioned, it was not realistically going to happen. So those are my comments. Thanks again for your work.
Thank you, Commissioner Heckman. Staff, did you want to respond to any of his comments? All right. I see some hands up. I would love to be able to give my comments next and then go to the commissioners who have follow-on comments, if that's all right. I'm going to try, since we are going into 2.5 hours on this item, I will try not to cover anything that any ground we've already tread. First of all, I agree with several of the commissioners before who have expressed gratitude that you have brought this to us and engaged us in what is an absolutely wonderful discussion and very meaningful about how to improve the quality of life in Palo Alto over the next few decades and century. So thank you for doing that. I understand it is a opportunity to get a lot of feedback, and you've already gotten a lot of feedback, but that is a signal that you are doing this right and involving the community effectively. Okay, if you are not speaking, if you could please mute, thank you. Okay, I appreciate the comments about this being more challenging for multifamily homes than single family homes, so I won't readdress that. The charging of electric vehicles at the workplace may be incentive in itself if we can find a way to encourage more businesses to offer charging to their employees, although I do note that one of our commissioners and some other folks in the community have suggested that potentially not necessarily offering that as a free service so that folks will focus on the convenience of being able to charge and not the cost of charging, being better at work versus other places in the community. Would love to see more charging opportunities on city property. I think we have a few of those, but we could do more of that. Would be interesting when you propose this to the city council in your alternatives, just to maybe speculate about what kinds of locations may be better than others, because that's something we could do sooner. And again, that would incentivize electric vehicles. For example, I'm thinking about like the Mitchell Park Library, the few stations we have there are almost always full, which is a great sign, right? and that might be an opportunity for us to do a little bit better. And then we can also think about the comments about raising funds through parking fees and things like that may become easier if we have the charging stations associated with it. I know that's a little too much detail on this item, so I will move on. Thinking about the carrot and stick comment that some of the commissioners have made, we may want to frame any of the costs that we add as maybe a carbon tax or something like that, so people understand where the costs are coming from, and that it's for a good reason and not a random reason, so that they can connect these two items. That may also help people get on board if we do need to go that direction. One of the things I wanted to ask about, and I'll pause in my list of questions to discuss this now. Do we have information about the 2/3 of students who are not biking to school, and what kinds of trips are being incurred and for what reason, and how much of that is local, that kind of thing?
So we only have information about school trips.
Okay.
But we do have on the Safe Routes website all the data that we've collected for several years, decades in some cases. We have parked bike data for decades, but if you want to know about who's coming to school by car, who's coming to school carpooling, we have that data on our website.
Great, thank you. I bring it up because I think a lot about how we can address that. Mainly, I think about it when I'm one of those parents that is in the car trying to deal with that issue, and how I wish I was not contributing to that traffic. So I would love to think about how to expand the transit discussion to schools in general, from the public transit side, not the PAUSD bus. But also, since you're also heading over to the PRC next, just thinking about, I just did a little search here of what of the parks that I might want to go to could I get to without driving, and using transit alone. And the quick search I did didn't show any ability to get to Foothills or the Dish or whatever with transit. Now that may be COVID related, but I would love for you just to think about how some of these common trips would be easier with transit, and we don't have to cover the whole city necessarily the first moment we roll it out. We can have specific things in mind if we do manage to get our shuttle back. Just thinking about opportunities like that. Social equity comments were mostly addressed. Only thing I would add is potentially at the point of replacement. I think Commissioner Alcheck mentioned this, at the point of replacement might be the best opportunity for us to influence purchases and skew it in the direction. I don't know how far down that path how prescriptive we want to be and say, if you're buying a new appliance, it must be this, versus using the availability incentives and other incentives that Commissioner Alcheck described. I agree with the comments of Commissioner Lowing about and others about the ambitiousness of some of these proposals. However, I think it's really good for us as a community to know where our bookends are, right? What's too little, what's too much, and then that helps us define our space. So I think it's really useful to have that. But like some of the other commissioners, I would encourage you to frame it during the presentation that that is what your intention is. That, and I think you've uh, taken some steps to do that tonight, but potentially, especially when it goes in front of council, potentially you could be even clearer about that. Do we know, one of the commissioners made a comment about COVID affecting transportation demand. Do we know if that is for health reasons or, that people have been asked to work from home?
So transit has experienced, across the country has experienced massive drops in ridership because of shelter in place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but at the same time as places open up, and if social or physical distancing rules still apply, that will reduce the capacity of transit.
I see. So how many people could fit on a bus or a train at the same time? And I do understand people are wearing masks when they take public transit now and taking steps to make it safer. So, okay.
Sorry,
Yes.
and just one more thing, sorry. And there will be people who will not want to get on a bus or a train at all and will instead, who may have commuted that way before, but will get into their cars instead because they still feel uncomfortable being in a transit vehicle with the possibility of COVID. That's what I think that comment is about.
So do we think that the projections here that we may not have 10 years to work on increasing transit, that needle has been moved ahead 2 years or until whenever a cure is found, and that shortens the amount of time that we have to ramp up transit programs? It's just something to think about in terms of framing how ambitious we're going to be, because we may not have all 10 of those years. Okay. I agree with Commissioner Alchek that it's good that staff will be presenting the menu of options, because they will be able to have a sense of what the community is ready for, and we'll continue to have public involvement, public feedback during those discussions. And I really liked the idea about case studies, and I've been thinking about this in general for the city, but specifically just to apply it to this situation. Have we developed personas or different, for those who don't know this marketing term, it's a imaginary person with characteristics that reflect members of our community so that we can look at programs from different angles. And do we have personas in the city that we could apply that we could use that lens to look at the proposals through? Like it would affect this particular community more or this particular community less?
Chair, I'm not sure that we have those personas developed, although I love when those are part of understanding things. It's especially helpful in communication for people to understand kind of a typical person puts those statistics into something that all of us can understand or relate to. So that may be something that we can incorporate. I don't know how it would be incorporated into the study, but perhaps into how we might think about the ways that our Palo Alton's life looks and relates to that. I see Sylvia nodding. If maybe she can add to how that might fit into the study and this work.
Yeah, I think that might be something, to think about after we get through the analysis. But I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful, and at least to be able to document, like Commissioner Heckman said, we had all these wonderful different ideas from different perspectives. And it would be nice to be able to document those perspectives and those lenses to look at, so that if someone comes back and says, did you think about this group that would be affected? We can say yes or no, we didn't. And yeah, I think it would be helpful. It's a way to capture that filter for what is something to consider versus what may be out of scope. Okay. I like the idea about the parking fees funding the shuttle. I don't have more to say than I'm intrigued by it. So that was interesting to hear about. And yes, just to close, that's this page of notes, sorry. Yeah, all right, so let me just quickly get to my other notes that I had in the document. It's not that much. Yes, I agree with Commissioner Suma and the others who have mentioned that coronavirus is, some of these behavior modifications are not lasting, right? These are things we're doing for now, but that are hard, and we're, as a community, I think we may see some major changes whenever it becomes safer again. So I wouldn't rely on the fact that people are going to continue working from home to the extent that they have and things like that. And you have that noted on packet page 13. When you say right under that on packet page 13 that education is an area of focus missing from the 2020 SCAP, can you clarify what you mean about that? What kind of education?
Sure. So what we meant is that a broader educational campaign to the community is missing. So we had 204 people participate in our first community workshop, which was a great turnout. It was, I think, it happened in week 2 of shelter in place. So that was great, but 204 people is not a very significant percentage of the 68,000 people who live in Palo Alto. So if we're serious about getting to 80 by 30 with true emissions reductions, then we need to educate the community about what that means. We need to educate them about what it means to potentially shut down the natural gas utility, for example, what it means to electrify.
So education about the program and the kinds of decisions that are being made in the program, and not necessarily broad education on climate change or something like that. You specifically awareness of this program?
Correct.
Okay, that's helpful. And you just mentioned the utility scale infrastructure shift is how it's worded on packet page 15, but you know, that is an interesting outer boundary of what we could do. So my feedback on that is really that you have abstracted that concept pretty dramatically to say utility scale infrastructure shift. It may be worthwhile to say, for example, discontinuing gas service or something like that, so people can understand it, because it's a little, yeah, it's a little abstract right now. I think people wouldn't get, they go, oh, okay, but not really know that that's what you're talking about without reading the full packet. Okay, that's it. I just want to say thank you all for presenting this, for preparing this, for incorporating the feedback from the previous discussions so quickly and encouraging such an interesting and lively discussion. I do see we have a few more comments for people with follow-up questions, so I hope you'll stick around. But fellow commissioners, I would love for us to maybe set a soft target of 9 o'clock. So let's try and keep it short and sweet for these follow-up comments. Thank you. All right, so we'll call on Commissioner Riggs, followed by Commissioner Lowing. And then if you want to raise your hand, please do so now.
Yeah, I can keep it pretty short. So a couple things I just wanted to, that I had my original notes on the report that didn't come up, I wanted to bring up. Congestion pricing. I think Commissioner Olczyk brought it up, but I want to reiterate that it's a really powerful tool. We didn't talk about curb or roadway pricing though, and curb pricing is definitely emergent. So I think Sylvia may want to consider that within our suite of tools. And I know Fair and Fears has done some experimentation on this. They had a TRB paper on it last year, so maybe nudge them a little bit on it. Fuel mix. All the suggestions are super EV heavy. And I'm just gonna, again, if you've been tracking the market, the company Nikola is actually valued at higher value than Ford right now. They're a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle company. So I think the fuel mix part needs some investigation. Hydrogen is definitely a part of the future in the next 10 years. Hydrogen is super hot right now, and hydrogen isn't mentioned once in here. And I'm not like, there's the Simpsons episode is the monorail episode. I'm not trying to be the monorail person, but because we've been talking about hydrogen for a long time, but hydrogen is definitely should be a part of, I think, the fuel mix. And we didn't, this is very EV centric, but what we're seeing now is even Rivian is going to do range vehicles that are hydrogen fuel cell electric. So this needs to be more market responsive. That's my comment there. Sylvia, you're totally right. Our TDM programs are amazing. I want to commend the staff, but I do think more can be done, and you recognize that as well. And I think I've said this a couple times again. I think integrating behavioral science is actually critical. Something I've talked to a number of the corporations around the Bay Area about. And Sylvia, you probably at Stanford when they were doing the Capri program. I mean, we should bring back the Capri program. If people don't know about it, Google it. It was actually awesome. There's opportunities with the TMA and with, I've been talking with Greg Tanaka and a couple people about kind of little micro experiments we could do that are kind of radical TDM. So I think that maybe circling back with the TMA and looking at synergistic opportunities with them would be great. Finally, low-hanging fruit on the EV component, Commissioner Alchek brought the power upgrade question up. I try not to be anecdotal here, but I did a panel upgrade recently for an EV, and the permit fees were pretty exorbitant, right? So I did permit it. I'm on commission. I went through all the channels, and it was really costly. And immediate low hanging fruit, like why are we charging permit fees for a panel upgrade for an EV? Like I went from a 100 amp panel to a 200 amp panel. I should not have had to pay a fee for that. And I'm not thinking about this from my own perspective, but that is an immediate incentive you could give to do that. Lastly, I just want to underscore Commissioner Heckman's comment. I've expressed frustration from the dais before, and I've just said crass things about like being irrelevant. We're not irrelevant, but I do think that council needs to take advantage of coming to us early and often. And I think I want to underscore what he said about like, I feel like we need to see some of this stuff a little earlier in the process. And I'll be honest with you, Commissioner Heckman, I have the same frustration. Is that like, I'm not sure when stuff is supposed to come to us. And I would love to have seen this 6 months ago. And this is not a staff critique, it's not a process critique, but I just think, and please, like, I would love to see this stuff earlier and to be a part of the dialogue earlier. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Riggs. Commissioner Suma and then Commissioner Lowing. Commissioner Suma, you had some comments to share?
Sorry, I didn't realize I had put my hand up, but I will I've been putting a couple things in chat. Oh, we're not supposed to be using chat. Okay.
Right, it's fine to just share it here now. That's fine.
I didn't realize we weren't supposed to be using chat. I just, since you called me on me, I do want to mention that a lot of the assumptions that we've made about transit-oriented development, even by Peter Calthorpe, who's sort of the father of transit-oriented developer for all you planning nerds like me out there, they've kind of decided that won't work in the Bay Area. One of the reasons is the inadequacy of the existing public transit systems we have. They just don't go to the places people need. And also the extremely exorbitant cost of creating new public transit systems. So he has made a come around, for those of you who know who Peter Calthorpe is, kind of has a different model that's based on really small electric vehicles that would have take you from destination to destination, which is kind of futuristic for us to consider right now. But I do think that it's important to remember that transit all over, but especially in the Bay Area, has been declining, the use of public transit every year, as kind of in lockstep with the rise of ride-hailing services. And so I want to be careful about counting too much on that, because I think we may get caught up in something that we're trying to do in good faith that it's no longer actually as viable as we would hope it might be. So, and I also want to put a plug in for vegetarianism, because it has a profound effect on the environment. I'm just being goofy.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Suma. Mr. Yang?
Yeah, so I'm just going to share my screen quickly. I just realized recently that there were some commissioners who were using the chat function of the webinar, and just to ensure that these communications are also being made publicly, I'm going to basically share the what went on there. It's basically Commissioner Riggs shared the statistics from the census that he also spoke about on the record. Commissioner Rupavar thanked him for that information, and then Commissioner Suma made some comments that she just reiterated again on the record. But this was what was happening in the chat, and we will refrain from using that feature in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. I would also like to disclose that I have been coordinating speaker order on one-to-one on the chat as well. Just asking if a commissioner wants to go next. So we will refrain from using that and move on. So Commissioner Lally, you are next. Thank you for your patience while we work through that legal item.
Yeah, thanks. What Commissioner Riggs brought up at the end, I had as one of my 2 points quickly that I wanted to raise. And I would say that the fact it is a process problem that we're not seeing these things before council does. Council only saw this a week ago. So if we had seen it 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, that would have helped them, which is one of our goals, because we just had a 3-hour very productive discussion, and they could benefit from that. And I think that's the better process than to have it a week after council. So I would just record that for the record. And the second thing is that I totally understand how you folks got your assignment and how you're sort of bookending all the options. Frankly, I'm just thinking that for efficiency purposes, for your time and the consultant's money, if there are things like the ICE vehicles, you already know that if we eliminated internal combustion engines, the problem is solved. So I don't really understand why you would bother to have them run that scenario, because you already have the answer. So it's just, it's kind of out there. And then the second one is, I hope that when you come back with these options, you also have some sort of a probability, or maybe even better, say, these are ones we don't recommend for such and such a reason. You could say that the hot water heaters cost $500, not including fees, and you don't think that we really want to burden people with that. So we would have to pay for it ourselves, and there's 50,000 households, so it's $25 million. What do you think we should do? I think we should skip it. So, just sort of a reasonability quotient there, which I think would help council parse all these options on the menu when they get them. So, thanks.
All right, last call for hands on speaking on this item. All right, seeing none, I wanted to thank you all again. Great conversation. As the commissioners have shared, we're eager for this kind of content. We would love to see you more and engage in these types of topics more. So thank you for bringing it to us, and we hope to see more sooner, earlier, whatever we can to engage on these kinds of conversations. We're really excited about it, as you can see. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Okay, we will close that item, and I believe the last agenda item is minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion about the minutes? Raise your hands or unmute yourselves. Okay, Commissioner Suma.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Okay, thank you. Was that Commissioner Rupu? I mean, Vice Chair Rupivar?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Any seconds?
Second.
Commissioner Suma, thank you. Any comments? Seeing none.
I wasn't
Comment.
at this meeting, so I due to COVID related issues, so I'm gonna abstain.
You will abstain. All right, well, we'll do the voice vote. And thank you
Comment.
for clarifying.
I-
Comment, you do?
I had sent in some revisions. They weren't mentioned, but I had sent those to staff a few days ago. I think, yeah, the May 27th.
All right, staff, did you receive those comments?
I believe so. Vin, can you verify if you received the comments?
Yes, I did. I thought I had sent it out to everyone. Did that not happen?
Were there?
I thought I got them. Sorry.
That's okay. Were there any substantive changes in case folks did not see them?
No, they were actually only just grammar changes.
Okay, great. In that case, maker and seconder, would you amend the motion to approve with Commissioner Heckman's feedback incorporated?
Yes. So I'd like to move to approve the minutes, including Commissioner Heckman's comments and revisions.
Oops, sorry, I agree.
All right, thank you. Mr. Nguyen, can we take a voice vote?
Yes, Commissioner Olczek?
Aye.
Commissioner Heckman?
Yes.
Commissioner Lowing?
Yes.
Commissioner Riggs?
I'm abstaining.
Okay. Vice Chair Rupivar?
Yes.
Commissioner Suma?
Yes.
Chair Templeton?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Excellent. Thank you all. We will close item 3 and move on to committee items. Any committee updates? Okay. Hearing none, we can move on to commissioner questions, comments, announcements, and future agenda items. And I would like to remind you, if you have new vacation plans that would prevent you from dialing into this meeting remotely or cause any other absences, please let us know. Thank you. All right, and I'm not seeing any new comments come up.
If commissioners don't have comments, I can speak to the future agenda items.
Okay.
That's all right.
Yes, please.
So as we mentioned several times today, on our next meeting on July 8th, we'll be talking about VMT. That was also a discussion that happened at council, and they did make a decision because we had a July 1 deadline to make a decision about our new VMT thresholds. And so part of the purpose of that study session is because as the PTC will be reviewing EIR documents with these new thresholds, with the new VMT applied. And so we want to make sure that you all are acquainted with and kind of schooled in as much as we can in one study session, kind of this new threshold. And so that when you see that, it will be different than previous CEQA documents and EIRs that we may have reviewed in the past. And then we'll also be having a discussion about the regional housing needs allocation. And Ms. Atkinson, who is here this evening, will be bringing that forward to talk about the RENA allocation. You may have recently seen that HCD, the Housing Community Development Department of the state, did release the numbers to the Bay Area of what the total allocation is for the Bay Area, all of the counties that are under the jurisdiction of ABAG and MTC. And that is about 440,000 homes needed in the next RENA cycle, which is, I believe, an 8-year cycle. So this is a 6th cycle. And for context, the previous cycle, I think, was like 187,000 or so homes, which was just, only 8 years ago, to not that long ago, was the 2015 to 2022 cycle. So it's a significant increase from that time. And I will say, I love housing, and I think RENA is really important. I know we have different people have different views about RENA, but I think figuring out housing is important. And
I think the uncertainty of COVID has made all of us kind of want to take a pause, but I don't see that happening. And I think that this is going to continue. We're going to be moving forward with our housing element. We'll be moving forward with addressing the housing crisis, even as it continues to take shape and change perhaps under COVID. This is kind of the world that we're wading into. So we will welcome your feedback on that process. And as we can, at this point, give feedback to the Housing Methodology Committee on the methodology that we'll be using in the Bay Area to take that big RENA that is for the whole Bay Area and allocate that out to jurisdictions. So we're at a good point in time to really be giving feedback on that. And then later in July at our second meeting, we'll be having the Castellea project come forward with its final published EIR for consideration. So that will be a long night, I imagine. So please get your sleep the night before and be ready to pay attention to what may be our longest Zoom meeting, at least as the PTC. So I'll leave it at that and then just add that tomorrow and next Tuesday for the NBCAP, we'll be having 2 small group meetings to try to have facilitate more discussion by having not all 14 of us there, but having groups of 7 to see if we can work towards actually building some consensus around how we might tackle some of the issues that group is working to address. So I look forward to that. I think it will be a really rich discussion, as it always is, but hopefully perhaps even more dialogue, just because we'll have more capacity and more space to talk amongst us. So those are the upcoming things. And I think the last thing I would add is I believe we did all confirm, you did all confirm, and thank you, to have a joint session with the ARB. I believe that's in August. And so we'll make sure that you have the Zoom link and everything for that, and even just a hold on your calendar, and we'll work to get you prepared for that meeting as well. So thank you all for your responsiveness to that item.
Thank you. Do you think we could add that to our list of 2020 scheduled meetings, that joint session?
Yeah.
I know it's not on our original meeting list, but it would be great to have it in there for the public.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. We'll get them there for the next meeting.
Thank you. I see Commissioner Suma has raised her hand.
Just a quick request for staff. I think our next meeting is going to be really heavy in material and reading and studying up. And if any of that is available before the Friday before the meeting, it would be great to get it early. And yeah, if it's possible, obviously.
That's a great suggestion. We will try. We do have some materials probably that we can provide earlier that may not be with the staff report, but they're kind of, I don't want to say evergreen, but they're not going to, the material, the attachment is the attachment, whether the report comes out on Friday or today. And so we may be able to provide those. There's also a couple of videos that are part of the staff report that do a really good job of kind of giving an overview of these new thresholds, and those kind of a good primer, before diving into the reading materials. Sylvia?
Yeah, I mean, all the council materials are public and you can read those. So we could just forward the council staff reports.
Yeah, but what we can do, we'll have Vin send the staff report from the council meeting and maybe highlight, Sylvia, we can highlight what's relevant to maybe pay attention to, and also include the video links in that email so you can just really quickly find those materials.
I appreciate that suggestion, Commissioner Suma, especially as there's a holiday weekend in there that one may try to not spend 8 hours a day in front of the computer. So it would be nice to be able to front load that a little bit. So I appreciate that suggestion very much. Okay. Any other comments? We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.